Chapter 381. Helene Vivian didn't think that the current Beligaju had the time to accompany her to investigate the resentment. The date of the secondary consort selection was imminent. Whether Beligaju wanted to select this secondary consort or not, he had to solve this matter. Helene Vivian's head was a little swollen from thinking. In addition, the weather was hot. Her back was wet after a few steps, which made it difficult for her to calm down. The feeling of being roasted by the sun was not good. Staying in the house was stuffy. Helene Vivian had never thought that she would miss the air conditioner of the 21st century so much. To be honest, she was a little hesitant. If there was really a way to go back to the modern world, would she be able to go back after she was done with the matter here? Helene Vivian didn't think about this from the beginning, because she was used to going with the flow. Wherever she went, the first thing she thought of was to adapt. But now that she had such a thought, she couldn't stop it. However, even if it was like this, Wei Wei still maintained her own unique rationality. She knew that the most important thing for her now was not to stop the resentment or whether to go back to the modern world. It was her physical condition. The night of the full moon was coming soon. She had to make all the preparations in advance, so she didn't hesitate. She directly used all the people who could be used and arranged to meet the second young master of the Hay family at the trading courtyard. When Helene Vivian walked into the trading courtyard, it was time for dinner. After the people eating saw her, one after another, intentionally or unintentionally, their gazes shifted away as they quietly discussed. No wonder the emperor would let the third prince choose a new consort. This Helene Wei Wei's face is really, sigh. That's why Sister Yun is still the best. Someone continued, last time, everyone was punished. Only Sister Yun was fine. It can be seen who the third prince is hiding in his heart. Helene Vivian listened to the voices below. She didn't know why her chest felt a little stuffy. It was probably that feeling in her body again. That was enough. Helene Vivian laughed self-deprecatingly. She raised her head and drank a cup of cold water. Just as she was about to fan herself with her hand, she heard a deep and pleasant voice, "Are you alone?" Helene Vivian raised her head and was met with a pair of gentle and smiling eyes. That pair of eyes seemed to be the purest in the world. They were long, narrow, beautiful, and as clear as water. The man smiled at Helene Vivian, as if he could calm down the heat of the summer. Is it boring to listen to these people talk? A little. Helene Vivian supported her chin with her fingers and curved her thin lips. But it's all right. What do you think, young Master Wushuang? Isn't it like watching a show? Jing Wushuang was stunned for a moment before she smiled and said, I thought my disguise was perfect, but you saw through it. These people are really interesting. Helene Vivian lightly smiled and used the teacup in her hand to touch the other one on the table. I've always said that I don't have time to drink tea. Today, I'll treat young Master Wushuang. You can call me Wushuang. Jing Wushuang's gentle voice always made people feel comfortable. He looked at Helene Vivian's wrist and coughed. Are you comfortable using the Myriad Manifestations umbrella? Helene Vivian nodded. It's very comfortable. I made a few changes later on. Really? Jing Wushuang stretched out her hand. Let me see. Helene Vivian didn't refuse. She moved her fingers and a black umbrella appeared in her hand. Jing Wushuang took it and twisted the handle a few times. As expected of the golden boss of profound heavens. You can even think of such changes. I'm just playing with it for fun. Helene Vivian didn't care. Her martial chi was different from other people's. It didn't matter to her whether or not she had martial arts. Jing Wushuang looked at Helene Vivian and smiled. In this world, you're the only one who thinks of martial arts as a game. After he finished speaking, he lightly coughed twice. A thick medicinal scent wafted out of his long sleeve. That day, outside the city, I thought you didn't want to marry into the royal family. Helene Vivian knew which day he was talking about. It was the day she used all kinds of methods to escape from His Highness. She propped up her chin and said lazily, "At that time, I didn't want to." "Then why did you want to?" Jing Wushuang's hand paused in the middle of drinking tea. When he looked at Helene Vivian, his smile widened. Helene Vivian wouldn't tell anyone about the deal between her and Beligaju. She just said, "I thought the third prince wasn't bad, so I married him." "So that's how it is." Jing Wushuang didn't ask any more questions. He had always been like this, knowing when to stop when it was appropriate to do so. And he didn't make people feel awkward. It was probably because of the thick medicinal scent on his body. It was like he could even calm down the years. Even if he didn't say anything, he still made people feel comfortable. Helene Vivian yawned and felt a little sleepy. Jing Wushuang glanced at her. "Tired?" "A little." Helene Vivian simply laid her whole body on the wooden table. Jing Wushuang looked into her eyes. "Have you not been resting well recently?" "Yes." Helene Vivian counted. She had 3 nightmares last night. In addition, she had been consciously or unconsciously resisting the heat brought by the dual cultivation these days. It was inevitable that she couldn't sleep well. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes. His long and thick eyelashes were beautiful. "Is it because the third prince is going to choose a concubine?" "No." Helene Vivian paused and smiled gently. "It's not because of him. It's because of me. Maybe it's because the weather is too hot." Jing Wushuang sipped the tea in the teacup. His voice was gentle. "If you feel sad, you can ask me to drink tea at any time. Don't force yourself. If you don't want him to marry a concubine, you can tell me." "Thank you, but..." Helene Vivian thought for a while and took a more tactful tone. "It's the third prince's business whether he wants to marry a concubine or not. I won't interfere. He was a prince, and it was very likely that he would become the emperor in the future. This time, she could interfere. What about next time? If she interfered in everything, it would be successful. Then she would definitely become a woman like the Empress. She would use all means to fight for a man's favor. She didn't want to be like that. So she wouldn't interfere in this kind of thing." When Bailey Jiaju walked up the stairs, he heard this sentence. That pair of beautiful eyes suddenly darkened. Helene Vivian also saw him. He was wearing a green robe and a white robe. With his 2 slender legs, his perfect inverted triangle figure had a cold indifference at this time. He took off his cloak and casually threw it to the side. After doing all this, he turned his head and stared into Helene Weiwei's eyes. His pair of eyes were clear and deep like the sea, suffused with a faint black color, as if he could drown a person. Chapter 382. When she saw his face, Helene Vivian was a bit stunned. The other side's silver mask couldn't hide his handsome face at all, but it only added to his cold aura. Helene Vivian opened her mouth, wanting to say something. Someone walked over from behind Beligaju. It was Tusu Feng. It looked like he wanted to talk business with Beligaju. Just as Helene Vivian was hesitating whether or not she should say something, Beligaju threw her 2 cold words, "Come here." Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows, but didn't refuse. Beligaju turned his head and only said one sentence to Tusu Feng, "We'll talk tomorrow." Then he held Helene Vivian's hand and walked out of the courtyard. Helene Vivian subconsciously smelled the scent of danger, but the other side didn't give her any chance to refuse. At this time, Beligaju, who had been waiting for Helene Vivian for more than 2 hours, had a cold look in his eyes. Beligaju hated waiting the most in his life, and he hated wasting time more than anyone else. But now, for the first time, he was waiting for the same prey. He had waited for it twice. Love was impossible for him, because love meant giving his heart to another person. For him, this kind of thing was a headache. Just now, Beligaju also realized what his thoughts towards Hellion Vivian meant. He had to admit that his interest this time was too strong. Maybe it shouldn't be explained by interest. Because he was very clear that his impulse towards Hellion Vivian was abnormal. Apart from wanting her, he was more inclined towards wanting absolute control. Just like now, what he wanted to do the most was to lock her up in his palace and lock her up on the bed for the rest of her life. He wanted to see if she would take his matters to heart. But could he do that? He couldn't. Because the other side clearly didn't like that kind of manipulation. Moreover, it would make others think that she was just a plaything to him. At this moment, Beligaju hated the self-righteous thoughts and restrictions of humans. He suppressed his emotions and found a place where no one was around. He led her in and pressed Hellion Vivian against the wall. What a good, whether I want to have a concubine is my own business. You are so generous. For so many days. He thought that the little thing in his arms had already softened under his tamed claws. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to treat her a little better and give her more freedom, she suddenly changed her mind. That was what she did to him. What he wanted was for Hellion Vivian to not care so much about the selection of the secondary consort. However, the process could not be omitted. Intervening meant that she cared. It meant that she had him in her heart. Beligaju thought that Hellion Vivian had been married to him. He had done what he should have done, and he had also done quite a few things that he shouldn't have done. No matter how heartless this little thing was, after such a long time, it should have warmed up. But in fact, not only was she not warmed up, she still didn't have the slightest intention of putting him in her heart. That feeling was like when you confidently raised the stairs, but in the end, there was only a flat ground in front of you. You fell with a bang and your face was covered in blood. Hellion Vivian had just said the word "I" when someone pinched her chin. Beligaju leaned over and looked at her. Wearing a silver mask, he looked like a vampire prince who had walked out of a comic. Open your mouth. Hellion Vivian was stunned. What did he mean? Or do you want me to do the whole thing here? Beligaju's hand slid under her robe in this position, and his cold fingertips brushed across her back. Bastard! He even said something like doing the whole thing. Who said that a certain prince was cold? He didn't look cold at all. This was not a public place, and there was no need for a man to maintain his prince demeanor. However, after realizing this, Hellion Vivian's fingers trembled and she subconsciously grabbed his hand. But obviously, she didn't have the strength to do it, so she could only let him ignite her back. Ha! Beligaju looked at her crimson face and knew that her body, which was on the verge of dual cultivation, couldn't withstand his provocation. He deliberately slowed down, and his fingers caressed her waist and back. His knees bent slightly, and he squeezed between her legs, making her unable to resist at all. Want me to let you go? Then open your mouth. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips. She didn't know how the other party seemed to have grasped all of her weaknesses, but she knew that if Beligaju continued like this, she might do something stupid like hugging him and rubbing against him. What dual cultivation? It was definitely to destroy her willpower. Beligaju coldly looked at Hellion Vivian, picked her up and put her in the corner, and raised his eyebrows to signal her to move faster. Hellion Vivian didn't want to provoke him at this time. Just as she opened her mouth, he kissed her lips. As if deliberately unwilling to let her go, Beligaju slid his tongue in and slowly pointed at her. Don't use your teeth. Hellion Vivian paused. He sucked the tip of her tongue, and her legs went soft in an instant. Look up at me. Beligaju seemed to want to teach her to the end. Suck it, give me your tongue, and breathe with your nose. It was the first time Helene Vivian had been kissed like this. As soon as she stuck out her tongue, she could see his handsome face more sinister than ever, as if he wanted to tear her apart and eat her. He didn't allow her to lower her head or close her eyes. As she listened to the kiss, her eyes were confused, and her face was slightly red. In the end, her whole body went soft. He lowered his head on her forehead, and the punishment was over. However, his hands were still in her robe, sliding from her back to her spine. In the future, if you say something wrong, I will use this method to teach you how to speak. Bailey Jia Ju's kiss landed on the tip of Helene Wei Wei's reddened ear. Finally, the cold air from before had lessened by quite a bit. Helene Vivian couldn't control it as well as he could. She was still panting, and she felt as if her whole body was about to be burned. Her tongue was still numb, and she was too lazy to speak. Beligaju also knew that he had bullied Helene Vivian this time. His left hand comforted her by patting Helene Vivian's back. Be honest in the future. Put away those thoughts of yours, understand? She wasn't honest enough. She was pressed in the corner and forced to kiss on the spot, but she didn't resist. She was honest enough. Thoughts? Could it be that Beligaju knew that she had asked Hei's to prepare for her? It shouldn't be. She didn't show anything. Moreover, the person who was going to choose a secondary consort was him, not her. Helene Vivian's legs were still weak. She looked at Beligaju, silently expressing her thoughts. Beligaju looked at her unconvinced little face, and the more he wanted to bully her, the more his fingers used force. He lowered his head and bit her ear. He really wanted to see what this pair of eyes would look like when they were forced to cry by extreme pleasure. Chapter 383. Helene Wei Wei didn't understand why he was suddenly so energetic. Just as she was about to open her mouth, her breath was blocked by a burst of slightly cool softness, carrying a unique iciness that suppressed all the words she wanted to say. She didn't even have time to react before that residual scent of tea pried open her lips with a temperature that could almost burn people. Beligaju grabbed Helene Vivian's slender waist and pressed her against his chest. Like a hurricane, he swept up the sweet taste that should have belonged to him. It seemed that only by doing this could he suppress the violence that wanted to lock her up. Once again, the slightly forceful kiss made Helene Vivian's mind blank. It was as if she had a lack of blood and completely lost the ability to think. When she reacted, it was sweet and soft. There was a strange excitement in response to the sound of footsteps not far away. A numbness like an electric current ran from her spine to her brain. Helene Vivian had long lost her strength. If Beligaju hadn't pressed her face into his chest, she would have definitely become the target of a crowd. Beligaju lowered his eyes to look at Helene Vivian in his arms. The corners of his mouth moved wickedly. He wanted to see how long her body could endure. Resist. The more you resist, the more excited he will feel. After such a long time, she still didn't understand that she had no chance to escape from him. After entangling, their breaths were a little messy. Helene Vivian felt that her whole body was burning hot and hungry. She couldn't think at all and could only follow the rhythm of the other party. If it weren't for the string of rationality in her mind, the consequences would have been terrible. This made Helene Vivian very depressed. Can't you punish me in another way? It was very dangerous to kiss like this, okay? Bailey Jia Ju softly replied with a He used his finger to rub against Helene Wei Wei's thin lips that were red from kissing. With a smile that was not a smile, he bit her again. You can push me away. Or is it that you simply can't push me away because you enjoy it too much? After Bailey Jia Ju finished speaking, he retracted his hand. He leisurely tidied up his clothes and paced out of the long alley. That appearance was like a kind hunter sparing the life of his prey. The fire Qilin was faintly discernible as it followed behind Beligaju. It did not understand why its master was so kind. Thus, the fire Qilin asked in bewilderment, "Master, you're letting her go just like that? How was this punishment?" According to the master's character, he should have swallowed the prey into his stomach in one gulp. Thinking about how generous he was now, it really didn't seem like something a sinister and cunning master would do. Beligaju laughed lowly, with a demonic charm that made people's scalp numb. "Pray, you have to wait for her to be at her weakest. Only when you bite her will the taste be the best." At first, the fire Qilin did not understand Beligaju's meaning. Until he smiled evilly and said, "The night of the full moon is coming soon." The fire Qilin suddenly understood. TSK, so master had this kind of plan. The night of the full moon was the time when the demonic cultivator's aura was the most chaotic. Especially with Miss Helian's current state, when that day comes, she will definitely need to be comforted. She will probably have a reaction tonight. Master is really, it's better to silently light a candle for Miss Helian who doesn't know anything. After being taught by the royal family on the spot, Helian Vivian's mind kept replaying what happened in the alley. Different from before, the kiss this time was especially clear. Beligaju was right. She did not feel disgusted. In fact, she enjoyed it. When the kiss reached the end, she actually wanted him to continue. Although she inevitably felt ashamed, in fact, no matter how she rinsed her mouth, she would remember what he said. "Suck it, give me your tongue, breathe through your nose, damn it." Helian Vivian took a deep breath. Who would have thought that she would one day fall to such a state? Other than dual cultivation, there seemed to be something else. If it was someone else, she would definitely feel disgusted. But the other party was Beligaju. It was as if everything was a matter of course. Helian Vivian's body froze. She did not return to the trading courtyard. Instead, she walked back to her own room and soaked her whole body in the cold water that was prepared in the room. Originally, her body had been very successful in resisting the heat recently. Today, after being disturbed by Beligaju, she felt that something was wrong. She could only use the cold water to lower her body temperature. Compared to Beligaju, it was obvious that Helian Vivian did not know much about devil cultivators. Just like what Yuan Ming said, the effects of dual cultivation were far greater than the effects of drugs. Other than feeling weak, she would also have many muddled dreams. Helian Vivian did not know how she fell asleep. She vaguely felt Beligaju pressing on her body, kissing her neck one after another. In her dream, he was still holding her up. His ascetic handsome face carried a devilish smile. Then, he reached his hand into her underwear, touching here and there. His touch made her entire body numb. She also dreamt that Beligaju was pressing on her legs while kissing her lips. He stole her breath while licking her tongue and upper jaw. He did not forget to teach her how to kiss. Helian Vivian felt that her entire body was about to be played to pieces. However, she could not escape. It was as if she was entangled by invisible threads. Her heart did not want to sink, but her body could not free itself. When she woke up, Helian Vivian was dumbfounded. What was with this kind of dream? She would rather have nightmares. Fortunately, the heat on her body had cooled down. Helian Vivian comforted herself. She casually took a towel and wiped herself. In the mirror, her thin lips were still a little red. It seemed that she still had to find He Zhe first and prepare the things. She did not want to lose to this kind of reaction. Dusk. The slightly tipsy sunset gradually sank to the bottom of the lake. A man dressed in white stood by the lakeside. His ink-black hair fluttered in the wind and was casually tied up with a black string. He was tall and slender, and his eyes were filled with a thick mist. "Master, she already does not remember you." Standing behind the man was a small person, carrying a gourd on his back. The man nodded and did not say anything else. The small person blinked and looked at the green dragon swimming at the bottom of the lake with the man. "Master, do you really want to destroy the auspicious aura here? If you do, won't many people die?" "Yes." The man smiled. "Isn't it good to have dead people?" The small person counted with his fingers. "It's not bad. Recently, the little baldy that you asked me to get close to is quite fun. Then, do you want to have fun or watch the 100 Ghosts parade?" The man waved his finger. The surface of the lake seemed to have sensed something and rippled. Chapter 384. The little one was excited when she heard the words, 100 Ghosts Parade. She began to jump around behind the man, and the gourd behind her emitted a black fog formed by the entanglement of resentment. "I want to watch the 100 Ghosts Parade." "Ah. I know, she will only come back during the 100 Ghosts Parade, right?" The man hummed again, and his low voice was swept away by the gentle breeze. At night, in the bustling commercial compound, Yunbiluo stood in the lobby on the first floor. Compared to the Hellion Jower, she was gentler and did not have the sense of superiority that she occasionally revealed. Therefore, she blended in well with everyone. In addition, she was not in good health. Sometimes, her face would turn pale, giving others a feeling that she needed to be taken care of. Therefore, when the students from the superior compound saw her trying to hold back her tears, they felt their hearts clench. The main reason was that the person standing in front of her was not anyone else, but Beligaju, who was about to select a secondary consort. "Your Highness, I was wrong back then." Yunbiluo looked at Beligaju with tears in her beautiful eyes. "You can punish me however you want, but please don't ignore me, okay?" A few of Yunbiluo's friends from the superior compound followed her here. They originally wanted to drink tea in the tea house, but they did not expect to meet the royal family. Now that they heard what Sister Yun said, it seemed that her relationship with the royal family was not simple. No wonder they all said that Sister Yun was special to the royal family. Previously, when they saw how cold the royal family was to Sister Yun, they thought it was just a rumor. Now, it seemed that no matter how cold the royal family was to Sister Yun, it was because His Highness cared too much about their past. The onlookers were worried for Yunbiluo's infatuation and the royal family's indifference. "Get out of the way." Beligaju's voice was very calm, as if he was not paying attention. Yunbiluo's tears welled up, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she looked at Beligaju with a hint of stubbornness. She knew that he liked obedient women since he was young. However, the ones who could arouse his desire to conquer were those who did not listen to him. "What do I have to do for you to forgive me?" When she said this, her eyes uneasily swept behind Beligaju. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and her voice became softer. A brilliant smile bloomed on her face. "I won't give up. Until you forgive me, I will always stay by your Highness' side and protect your Highness." Yunbiluo's voice was not soft. Her words touched many people. Hellion Vivian, who walked into the tea house with Hei's, naturally heard it as well. Hei's listened to the opposite side's words with interest. He tilted his head and glanced at Hellion Vivian beside him. "You can tolerate this." Hellion Vivian's expression did not change as she looked at the two people in the middle of the hall. She felt a slight stab of pain in her heart, but she suppressed it. Her footsteps did not have the slightest intention of stopping. Even if she encountered a scene that she did not like to see, she would not disrupt her plan. She only smiled faintly and continued to walk forward, as if whoever appeared in front of her had nothing to do with her. Hei smiled wickedly and followed her in. Beligaju, who was standing with his back to the door, did not see Hellion Vivian. His eyes, which were as deep as the night, were indifferent and noble. Yun Biluo panicked. Her eyes lit up as if she had thought of something. She reached out her hand and waved at Hellion Vivian, Wei Wei. She appeared to be very friendly. Those who did not know would think that their relationship must be very good. However, when Bailey Jiaju heard the two words Wei Wei, his face finally showed some expression. His long eyebrows furrowed, the action of lifting his leg to leave also followed by withdrawing. He turned his face sideways and saw Hellion Wei Wei first. Before that pair of eyes could warm up, he saw Hei Zhe standing by her side. That pair of inky eyes that made young girls willingly fly like moths to a flame thoroughly sank. At this moment, Yun Biluo had already walked up to Hellion Vivian. She wore a gentle smile on her face. "Why are you here?" Hellion Vivian looked at her and smiled, but her eyes were cold. She had clearly told her not to pretend to be familiar with her. Yun Biluo seemed to have forgotten about it. She continued to talk to herself. When she glanced at Hei's, the smile on her face became softer. "I saw Wei Wei coming down from Master Hei's carriage last time. Today I see Master Hei's again. What a coincidence." Hellion Vivian did not speak. She only looked at Yun Biluo's smiling face. When Yun Biluo could no longer maintain her fake smile, she raised her lips and said in a cold voice, "Miss Yun, there are some things that need to be stopped before it is too late." As soon as she finished speaking, she did not say another word. She strode past Yun Biluo and Bailey Jiaju. It was Yun Biluo's business that she liked to act. She did not want to play along with that weak lady. His Highness would be happy to play along with the maidservant that he was protecting, whether intentionally or not. She did not want to. She did not even want Yun Biluo to know anything about Hei's. She could roughly guess Yun Biluo's means. She could not get anything from her. Perhaps she would do something to the people around her in a fit of madness. Yun Biluo looked at Hellion Vivian's back view, which did not give her any face at all. The corners of her mouth curled up a little. The moment Beligaju missed Hellion Vivian's arm, his whole body turned cold. The remaining smile on his face disappeared in a flash, as if it had never existed. His chest suddenly felt as if it was blocked by cotton. His heart became more upset for no reason. His sleeves fluttered, bringing out a strong sense of hostility. Hei's, who felt everything, looked up and met Beligaju's gaze. He sneered in his heart. How did this woman find such a ruthless character for herself? She might be forced into a corner in the future. Were the plans she made in advance useful? Probably because Hei Zhe paused for too long, Wei Wei directly dragged him upstairs, her expression as tranquil as water. Bailey Jiaju, who was about to step forward, stood there coldly. His deep eyes were so deep that the bottom could not be seen. He frowned slightly. His 10 beautiful ivory fingers were hidden under his long sleeves. Perhaps it was because the temperature was too low, or because he had been out for too long. Even his fingertips were a little cold. It seemed to always be like this when facing Hei's. She was more defenseless than ever. Even that pair of cold eyes would emit a gentle light. He understood her. If it was not someone she absolutely trusted, she would not allow anyone to get close to her. Even the name she had called out when she was drunk was related to Hei Zhe. When facing him, she would only hide her secrets deeper. Even if she really wanted something, she would not ask him for help. She just had to ask an outsider. Chapter 385. Yun Biluo, who was standing at the side, looked at the direction he was looking at. Her pair of clear eyes darkened. Beligaju did not speak. His jade-carved skin glowed faintly. That pair of cold eyes slowly drooped down. His long and thick eyelashes, like a crow's wing, cast a dark shadow on the ground. Even Yun Biluo could not figure out what he was thinking just by looking at his expression. This made Yun Biluo more or less helpless. He had been like this since he was young. She could not figure him out. However, no matter how interested he was in Hellion Vivian, she was afraid that he would not be interested in her now because he hated dirty prey the most. Yun Biluo's eyes lit up as she recalled what she heard before. She used to feel that there was something strange between Hellion Vivian and His Highness. Now, she finally knew why it was strange. That was the reason why they got married. It seemed that this was worth investigating. Beligaju was not interested in knowing what Yun Biluo was thinking. What he needed most now was silence. He was afraid that he would not be able to control the beast in his heart and accidentally tear Hellion Vivian into pieces. Master, as Fire Qilin, it was impossible for it not to notice the change in Beligaju's martial qi. Looking at the pair of eyes that were beginning to be invaded by the demonic nature, Fire Qilin immediately showed itself. Bailey Jiaju quickly walked out of the tea house. He swung his fist and ruthlessly smashed it against the stone wall. After a loud bang, he shook his hand and took a deep breath. The dull pain transmitted from the surface of his fist made him slightly calm down. Bailey Jiaju coldly smiled and ground out a few words from between his thin lips. Sure enough, no matter how I raise you, you can't mature. The wind that came in messed up Bailey Jiaju's hair. He looked at his bleeding fingers. The coldness in his eyes was like a pine and cypress that melted into his ink-like eyes. Hellion Vivian did not know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the room suddenly darkened. The sun seemed to be covered by clouds and the light became thin. Are you thinking about the third prince? A familiar voice rang in her ears. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked over, only to see the black-haired, white-clothed Hei's drinking tea with a faint smile on his lips. His eyes were dark and pure, without a trace of impurity. His other hand used the teacup to touch her face. No. Hellion Vivian didn't even think about it. She said almost instinctively, my relationship with him is not what you think. At this moment, even Hei's eyes were filled with amusement. Then what is it? Could it be that the relationship between the two of you isn't real? Otherwise, why would this girl ask him to prepare so many things to escape from the capital? It was obvious that she didn't plan to stay in the palace forever. We even entered the bridal chamber, how could it not be real? Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea. She looked indifferent, trying to skip the topic. However, Hei's was very smart. Don't deny it. You asked me to prepare so many things, which one of them isn't for leaving the capital? But this is good too. I've told you before that the third prince will choose a secondary consort sooner or later. You've met Yun Biluo, so it's very likely that she will take advantage of this opportunity to enter the palace. I used to wonder why you were willing to be the third prince's chess piece with your character. Now it seems that you two have reached some kind of agreement. He didn't use me as a chess piece. Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand. We are helping each other. I help him to stop the retired emperor from urging him to marry. He is my backer, so that I can have more ability to take back the Hellion family in the clan meeting. I asked you to prepare those things for me to leave a way out for myself. Hei's glanced at Hellion Vivian with a meaningful look in his eyes. I don't think the third prince will like you to leave such a way out. He probably won't want you to leave the palace. Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and fiddled with the teacup with her fingers. I'm not suitable for the palace. There are too many women fighting for favor in the palace. I'm suitable for finding someone to live with. There's nothing else. Hei's looked at her absent-minded appearance and thought of what had just happened downstairs. He reached out his hand to touch her head and smiled domineeringly. Wait until we leave the capital, then slowly look for it. Anyway, you have money on you, so you can raise whatever you want. Hellion Wei Wei's mood improved when she heard about her assets. She curled her thin lips and said, "It's true that I want to leave the capital. But I heard that you've been having a good time recently. Is that true? What things?" He eyes turned the teacup in his hand lazily. Hellion Vivian said something shocking. "It's about you being indecent." He eyes choked on the wine that he didn't drink. Hellion Vivian smiled happily. She held the teacup and drank a few mouthfuls. She looked no different from a shrewd little fox. Some people were like this. They didn't interact with each other, but once they did, there would be a lot to talk about. He eyes glared at Hellion Wei Wei. "What nonsense are you spouting? It's been spread outside. It said that young Master He has been too well-behaved these days. He didn't even touch women. I guess he likes men." Wei Wei's face carried a smile that could almost see through He's. "Did something happen between you and that little childhood sweetheart of yours?" He eyes coughed again. "You're just a child. Don't ask about adult matters. Tell me, why are you looking for me this time?" Hellion Vivian was about to open her mouth when her ears suddenly moved. She looked in the direction of the corner of the second floor. The person standing there was none other than Yun Biluo. She looked at Hellion Vivian with her bright eyes. "Miss Vivian, I want to sit down and talk with you." Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and smiled gently. "I'm sorry, I don't want to talk to you at all. You can leave now." She wasn't sure if Yun Biluo heard it, but at this time, it didn't matter if she heard it. If Beligaju really wanted to choose Yun Biluo, he would tell her about the agreement between them. She originally thought that Beligaju mistook the affection as a hunt. She even wondered if he liked her a little. Now that she thought about it, perhaps there was something wrong with her thinking and she was thinking too much. After all, there was Yun Biluo, the servant who had accompanied him for so many years. Hellion Vivian wasn't good at handling feelings, but she didn't like women who pretended too much. Yun Biluo took a deep breath, her eyes reddened. "I know my appearance made you feel threatened. After all, you're the princess. But if it wasn't for what happened back then, His Highness and I would have." Yun Biluo paused as if she was holding back her tears. "The selection ceremony is in 2 days. I hope you can give me a chance to stay by his side." Chapter 386. Your opportunity was not given by me, but by Beligaju. If you want to be a secondary consort, what you should do now is to look for Beligaju, not me. Hellion Vivian's voice was very calm, and one could not tell whether she was happy or angry. Yun Biluo shook her head with reddened eyes. "You still won't accept me, right?" He eyes did not say a word from the beginning to the end. He just sat beside Hellion Vivian, rotating a porcelain cup with his slender fingers, with a devilish smile on his lips. Yun Biluo glanced at He eyes, tears rolling down her face. She seemed to want to say something. "Young Master He eyes, can you help me to plead with the princess consort? There is still a misunderstanding between His Highness and me. As long as this misunderstanding is resolved, His Highness will know what he wants. Young Master He eyes should also understand that I don't want to hurt anyone, I just want to stay by His Highness' side." If it was an ordinary man, seeing a girl like Yun Biluo, he would inevitably feel pity. But who was He eyes? He controlled the rise and fall of the entire business world. How could he not see that some people would say that they were wronged even if they stabbed others? Initially, he did not intend to speak. Matters between women should be left to the women. Although he felt sorry for his girl, he also knew that Wei Wei could handle this kind of thing. But this He eyes just had to drag him into this, and it sounded like he was implying that Wei Wei was in the wrong. As if Wei Wei was the bad guy, and she was the true love of the royal family. Was there a mistake? Who was the mistress, and who was the legal wife? Really, how to say? His skin could not be any thicker. The smile on Hei's face grew wider, and the domineering aura on his well-defined face lessened. His gaze towards Yunbiluo was filled with gentleness. Hellion Vivian shuddered subconsciously. She did not know why, but every time she saw Hei's expression, she felt a chill down her spine. Hei took out a white handkerchief from his arms and wiped Yunbiluo's cheeks very gently. His voice was as gentle as silk. Don't cry anymore. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. He would wipe a woman's tears. This didn't seem like something the second young master of the Hei family would do. When Yunbiluo heard what he said, she felt even more aggrieved. With tears rolling down her cheeks, she called out, "Young Master Hei." However, before she could finish calling him young master, she heard young Master Hei's voice drifting over slowly. His voice still carried a devilish tone, but Yunbiluo was completely frozen on the spot. He said, "If your face is ruined from crying, what else can you use to deceive people? What are you going to use to deceive others when your face is ruined from crying? Now that you've ruined your face, what else can you use to deceive people?" Yunbiluo's fingers paused. There were still tears at the corner of her mouth, but her expression was a little stiff. It was a lively scene. Hei retracted his hand and threw away the handkerchief. He still had that overbearing and devilish temperament, as if what had just happened had nothing to do with him at all. When Hellion Vivian saw this scene, she laughed very unkindly. Yunbiluo bit her lips lightly. The people behind her could not bear to see the tears in her beautiful eyes. She took a deep breath and her shoulders trembled slightly. "It's okay if young Master Hei says so. I think I'm still too naive. I should fight for what I want and shouldn't worry so much. Now, I've made young Master Hei think that I've become a bad person. I know that there are some things that I shouldn't do, but His Highness and I have been together since we were young. I can't let go. I'm not asking Hellion Wei to give His Highness to me. I just want to enter the palace safely." As she spoke, she paused and looked at Hellion Vivian. "Hellion Vivian, can't you even agree to this request of mine?" Hellion Vivian laughed. Looking at the condemning gazes from all around, it seemed that if she did not fulfill Yunbiluo's wish, she would be breaking up a pair of ill-fated mandarin ducks. "It has nothing to do with whether you enter the palace or not." Hellion Vivian leaned back lazily and crossed her legs slightly. Her gaze was indifferent. The aura of a superior that had been dormant in her body leaked out little by little. "You've come to me again and again, saying the same thing every time. Even if you don't find it tiring, I find it boring. Yunbiluo, not all relationships are worthy of everyone's blessings. It's your business that you can't let go of Beligaju. If he can't let go of you too, then both of you are in love with each other. Now that the secondary consort selection has not started, you're acting as if I'm the one who's stopping you. If you really enter the palace, I won't interfere and you can do whatever you want. But now, I'm still the third princess consort. You keep on compromising. You're really a mistress and a bitch. You still want to set up a monument for yourself. The point is, are you sure that Beligaju will accept you as the mistress?" Hellion Vivian's last sentence made Yunbiluo burst into tears again. She was so weak that she could not even stand properly. She reached out her left hand and covered her face. "I don't want to do this. I'm the one who knew the royal family the earliest." Someone could not stand it anymore and reached out to support Yunbiluo from behind. "Sister Yun, don't talk to her anymore. You won't understand this kind of person." "That's right. The secondary consort selection is about to start. Sister Yun will definitely succeed. As long as the secondary consort is chosen, you won't have to worry about not being able to resolve the misunderstanding after spending a long time together. By then, it will be clear who His Highness really cares about. Since someone isn't willing to accept you, you don't have to worry so much when you become the secondary consort. If His Highness wants to divorce someone, you don't have to plead for that person. Helene Vivian listened to these words and the mocking smile on her face deepened. She often saw such things in the modern world. She really did not understand what people were thinking. She snatched someone else's husband and still acted so righteously. And the people around her would always be touched by such true feelings. Only the main wife would be bullied until she had no power to fight back. Helene Vivian still remembered what the mistress who snatched her father said when she came to find her. He has never loved you. Back then, he only married you because he needed a marriage. Until he met me, he said that he had never had the feeling of holding the whole world in front of one person. I can make him boil and make him willing to put down his work to accompany me. Big sister, let him go. Don't bother him anymore. Helene Vivian only wanted to laugh at that time. She, her father, and her mother were in love freely. It was her father who wooed her mother. Now, a mistress appeared and said that they never loved each other. The mistress's friend was not old. She remembered that the mistress was still a student at that time. Her friend spoke even more harshly. Tell me, how much do you want to divorce me? Sister, please take a look at your face when you have time. Although you look good and have a good temperament, are you younger than Ame and prettier than Ame? Both of them are truly in love, okay? Helene Vivian still remembered her mother's gloomy eyes. Wasn't it all because of her face? Chapter 387. Helene Vivian sneered and played with the porcelain cup in her hand. When she looked up at Yun Biluo again, there was a sense of oppression in her bones that made people tremble. Yun Biluo, do you believe that if you show up in front of me again, I will make sure that you can't be my concubine? Wasn't it just a competition of looks? Her face was still presentable. Yun Biluo probably did not expect Helene Vivian to say such things. She stopped crying and clenched her fingers that were hidden under her long sleeves. She turned around and looked at her friends with a pitiful expression. Let's go. Those people glared at Helene Vivian fiercely and walked down the stairs with Yun Biluo. Their comforting words could be heard faintly. Sister Yun, don't be sad. It's not up to her whether she can be the concubine or not. She should take a look at her own face. How can she stop the Emperor's imperial edict? I'm fine. Yun Biluo seemed to be trying her best to smile. The corners of her mouth were curved upwards, and her purpose was to make people feel more sorry for her. I've made everyone worry. He eyes looked at the interactions on the first floor and glanced at Helene Vivian. Girl, compared to Yun Biluo's pretentiousness, you are so far behind. I know. Helene Vivian took a sip of the tea and realized that it was a little cold. He eyes raised his eyebrows. Aren't you going to teach her a lesson? I'm busy these 2 days. Helene Vivian put down the teacup and looked absent-minded. He eyes reached out and brushed her bangs. Don't think so much. Yun Biluo can act, we can do it too. The main thing is what you think of the third prince. No. Helene Vivian's voice was indifferent. The main thing is what the third prince thinks of Yun Biluo. He eyes smiled. Whatever you say. Anyway, when the time comes and you feel wronged, I will take you away immediately. It's easy to make money in Jiangnan, and we can also expand the power of Wei Zhe world. Wei Wei hummed in agreement, yet her heart was filled with an indescribable warmth. Wei Zhe was very good to her, just like when a younger sister was bullied outside. As soon as the older brother heard that, regardless of whether he could beat the opponent or not, even if he was beaten black and blue, he would still help prevent her anger. She did not have such feelings when she was in the modern world. She had always been alone, even after her mother passed away, when she was slandered as a thief. No one thought of standing up for her. But He let her know what kinship was. He looked at Helian Wei Wei's cold expression of wanting to thank him, but was not used to saying it out loud. He reached out and patted the child's head. When other girls are your age, they only think about which family's young master is more handsome. You, on the other hand, have been acting like I'm very lazy and you'd better stay away from me since I first met you. Do you have to be so mature? Compared to you who started to visit brothels at the age of 12, I'm not mature. Helian Vivian took his hand away and said without hesitation. He whose dark history was exposed, twitched his mouth. His adopted sister was not. Wait. What did you call me? Hei's eyes lit up. Helian Vivian turned her head and raised her eyebrows. Big brother. Ha 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 ha, ha ha ha. Hei's went crazy and reached out to pat Helian Vivian's shoulder. You're finally willing to call me big brother. Helian Vivian almost vomited blood from his pat. She knew that the 3 generations of the Hay family were all boys. When Profound Heaven was just opened, Hei's had been talking about how he wanted a younger sister all day. In short, no one would have thought that the second young master of the Hay family, who walked sideways in the business world of the capital, was a standard sister Khan. Little sister, don't worry. Even if you're cold and poisonous, no one can bully you. Hei's felt that the feeling of having a younger sister was simply too great. He pressed Helian Wei Wei's head and rubbed it twice. In the future, he could show off his younger sister outside. First, he had to show off to the old man at home. Helian Vivian saved her head from Hei's hand. Cold and poisonous. Don't care about these details. Hei's coughed twice softly. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows and continued, let's talk about business. I want you to help me pick a few guards with good martial arts. They must all be women. Women? Hei's asked doubtfully. Why? Helian Wei Wei told him about her yab yum. After Hei's listened, he hooked his lips and smiled. Isn't it better to directly push the 3rd prince down? Helian Vivian was helpless. Why did this person have the same logic as Yuan Xiaoming? I don't want to let this kind of thing control me. Hei's hummed and said meaningfully, then, how about letting Big Brother spend money to help you find a man? No. Helian Vivian rubbed her forehead. Obviously, she was very repulsed by this proposal. Hei's looked deeply at Helian Vivian. So it's like this. It turns out that except for the 3rd prince, other men are not good, right? Hearing this, Helian Vivian suddenly froze. Think about it carefully. He stood up with deep meaning in his eyes. Big Brother will find you a good guard. As for the rest, it's still up to you to figure it out. But you have to be careful of Yun Biluo. She's quite capable of stirring up trouble. Helian Vivian nodded. I know. Then I'll leave now. Hei's finally rubbed Helian Vivian's head. If there's anything, ask your maid to come to me. Okay. Helian Vivian looked at Hei's back and began to analyze why she could only accept Baligaju. Yuan Ming said wickedly behind her, what's so strange about this? The 3rd prince's appearance is not bad. Your first time was also given to him. Of course, you have other feelings for him. The most important thing now is to collect more of his qi. When he really has other women, his qi will not be as pure as it is now. You make it sound like I'm a succubus who collects men's qi. Helian Wei Wei stood up and didn't continue thinking about that problem. Bailey Jiaju was the heir apparent who was going to inherit the throne. Unless he was willing to give up the beauties in his harem, there was simply no meaning in thinking about this problem right now. Because she longed for freedom more than anyone else. She couldn't stay in the imperial palace and spend her entire life fighting for a man. Coming down from the second floor, the first person Hellion Vivian saw was Murong Changfeng. Compared to before, Murong Changfeng now seemed to have a touch of unfathomable gloominess. Hellion Wei Wei did not understand what he meant by blocking in front of her. She only raised her eyes to look at him, then walked past him. "What's the difference between marrying him and marrying me?" Murong Changfeng said coldly behind her. "You couldn't stand the ambiguity between Zhao Er and me, but can you stand Yun Biluo by his side?" Chapter 388. Hellion Vivian turned around, her eyes filled with sarcasm. "What I can't stand is your scum and ingratitude. Murong Changfeng, save it. If you have the time to wander around in front of me, why don't you think about how to climb up? Didn't you kick me away because of this in the past? In your mind, whoever you marry is just a stepping stone on your career path." Murong Changfeng's expression changed when he heard Hellion Vivian's words, his fingers clenched so tightly that they made some noises. Then, he laughed mockingly. "The third prince doesn't need to marry anyone to climb up, but with your current appearance, how long do you think he'll allow you to stay by his side? You should have expected this when you married him, or else you wouldn't have asked He-Eyes to prepare a way out for you. What does our matter have to do with you?" Hellion Vivian looked at him indifferently. Her tone was neither cold nor warm. "Don't worry about it." "You." Murong Changfeng looked at the back of the figure that he could no longer get close to. Other than anger, there was also emptiness in his chest that could not be filled. Yun Biluo was standing under a locust tree not far from them. The corners of her mouth were slightly upturned. She combined what Hellion Vivian said in the tea house with what Murong Changfeng just said. The marriage between Hellion Vivian and His Highness was just a deal. So that was it. Yun Biluo's thin lips were half-curved. So it was just a relationship of mutual benefit. That was easy to explain. On the other hand, Hellion Vivian, who left the trading compound, wanted to take advantage of the time to go to Green Dragon Lake to see the green dragon at the bottom of the lake. However, there seemed to be more fog in Green Dragon Lake than usual. Hellion Vivian could not help but frown. "Something's not right," Yuan Ming called Hellion Vivian back. "Woman, don't go any further." Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks. "What's wrong?" "The aura here is not good for your current body." Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. "Come back after your dual cultivation day. Otherwise, you won't be able to hold on until the night of the full moon before you explode." Hellion Vivian glanced at the foggy Green Dragon Lake. "Is it because of the fog?" "This is not an ordinary fog." Yuan Ming's eyes slightly darkened. "I don't know what means someone used to gather all the resentment in the academy here. For now, it's not suitable for you to go further." Hellion Wei Wei frowned again. "What about the green dragon? You want to hand it to someone else? Go with the Green Dragon Lake with the full moon's with the full moon nights for him. Then come find the dragon. After the night of the full moon. Is a lots with his with the Dragon Lake, he-s. Well the of the green dragon the of the dragon the of the. From. Was with. Of teat. Splash. The lake water churned, creating layers of splashes. While Hellion Vivian and Yuan Ming were talking, a carriage stopped in front of the He family's bronze gate. "Madam, miss, we're here." The coachman opened the curtain. A young girl's figure walked down from the carriage. Her waist-length black hair was combed neatly behind her head. A pair of watery and charming eyes that made a man's heart itch unbearably moved. It seemed that she was thinking of something. And from this young girl's luxurious attire, it wasn't hard to see that this girl's identity was either wealthy or respectable. Although she was covered in a white veil, one could still see that her appearance and silhouette was clearly Hellion Zhao Er, who had fled a few days ago in order to avoid the rumors. The Hellion Zhao Er who had been resting outside for a few days looked much better. Su Yan Mo was standing beside her, supported by her hands. Both mother and daughter were smiling brightly. They had been waiting for this day for a long time. The third prince was finally going to choose a secondary consort. This was great news for them. Helene Vivian, that ugly girl, would definitely lose terribly. Both mother and daughter left the city to let the rumors in the city die down before they came back. However, Su Yan Mo unexpectedly received a piece of shocking news. She had found a clue about the hidden army. Madame Su hesitated for a moment. She waved her hand and signaled for her servant to wait. She adjusted her expression and walked towards the Hay family's residence. "May I ask what brings you to the Hay family's residence?" The two guards at the entrance turned to look at Madame Su, who was walking towards them. They frowned slightly. "My two brothers, please inform him that Madame Su of the general's residence is here to visit. She wants to discuss the hidden army with us." Su Yan Mo confidently mentioned the general's residence, and Old Master Hay would definitely invite her into the residence. "Please wait for a moment, madam. I will inform Old Master Chin." The two guards looked at each other when they heard the words hidden army. One of the guards turned around and walked into the Hay family's residence. After a while, the guard who went in earlier came back and said to Madame Su calmly, "Madam, the Hay family only welcomes the real Hellion family." "What do you mean by the real Hellion family?" Hellion Jower, who was listening at the side, asked coldly, "Am I not a Hellion?" The guard glanced at her and said calmly, "I don't think this young lady is the heir of the Hellion family. Then I should be qualified to meet the hidden army, right?" Hellion Jower could not hold back her anger. "The Hellion family will be handed over to my father. I am the heir appointed by my father. When the time comes, even the hidden army will belong to the general's residence again. I should meet them now so that we can get to know each other better." The guard was unmoved. "If you want to meet the hidden army, you must show your military residence. As for you, young lady, you don't have a military seal and you are not a real Hellion family member. So, please go back." After that, the guard did not look at Hellion Jower anymore. He looked straight ahead and scanned the surroundings, as if the mother and daughter in front of him did not exist. Su Yan Mo's smiling face was filled with disbelief when she heard the guard's words. According to her idea, she had originally brought Zhao Er to meet the hidden army. Zhao Er's identity as the Phoenix Girl was popular everywhere. Even if she was not, she should be able to meet Old Master Hay. As long as she met Old Master Hay, even if she could not get the hidden army support, she could at least understand the hidden army's thoughts through him. However, what she did not expect was that Old Master Hay did not give her any face at all. He did not even let her enter the Hay family's main door. Su Yan Mo gritted her teeth at the thought of this. After a short pause, Su Yan Mo turned around and walked towards the carriage with a gloomy face. Chapter 389. When Su Yan Mo's accompanying maids and coachmen saw her approaching with a gloomy expression, they were so scared that they lowered their heads and did not dare to say a word. This was because these people who served Madame Su all year round knew that according to Madame Su's habits, whenever she was in a bad mood, she would definitely find a random target to vent her anger on in this group of people. Madame Su did not do what everyone thought and instead walked straight into the sedan chair. Return to the residence. Madame Su sat back in the sedan chair with an unusually cold expression. She gritted her teeth and coldly spat out 2 words from her mouth. When the sedan bearers heard this, they quickly lifted the sedan chair. Hellion Jower clenched her fists unwillingly. "Mother, are we going back just like this? We haven't even seen the hidden army yet." "Zhao Er, didn't you hear what the guard said just now? If you want to see the hidden army, just being the descendant of the Hellion family is not enough. You must also have the military residence. In the sedan chair, Madame Sue gradually calmed down the anger in her heart. She recalled what the master of the Hay family had asked the guard to tell her and slowly explained to her beloved daughter. Hellion Jower was also smart. With just a few words of advice, her eyes lit up. So you're saying that even if that little bitch Hellion Vivian comes, as long as she doesn't have the military seal, she won't be able to see the hidden army, right? Yes, in order to truly deploy the hidden army, one must have the military seal. So even if that little bastard has the blood of the Hellion family flowing in her veins, it will be useless. Moreover, her actions in the past few years have already disappointed the hidden army. Otherwise, as the only descendant of the Hellion family, the hidden army would have contacted her long ago. However, the truth is that even old Master Hay doesn't like that little bastard. Even if she can find the hidden army, they might not necessarily listen to that little bastard's orders. Thinking of this, Madame Sue's face no longer had the anger from before. Instead, she smiled more happily than ever. The Hellion Jower also curled her lips and leaned on Su Yenmo's shoulder. She said happily, then wouldn't that little bastard Hellion Vivian's last escape route be cut off? After the third prince chooses a secondary consort, under good circumstances, he will still leave her a place in the palace. If the situation is not good, he will directly abandon that ugly girl. When that time comes, father will seize all of the inheritance rights of the Hellion family. That little bastard will definitely cry herself to death in a corner. Even if she has profound heavens, she still can't beat me. Of course, our Jiao heir is the most sensible and beautiful. Su Yenmo reached out and caressed the Hellion Jower's long hair. Imagining the days to come where she could hold her head high made her feel very relieved. By then, the congregation would be over and Hellion Vivian would be kicked out. She must bury that little bastard in the ground, just like her mother. However, Su Yenmo would never have dreamt that not only did Hellion Vivian get the recognition of the hidden army, she had even started her first batch of firearms experiments. Therefore, on that day, just as Su Yenmo left, Hellion Vivian received news that she was looking for the hidden army. After disguising herself, Hellion Vivian put on a cloak and went to the Hay family. Old Master Hay looked a little angry. They stole someone else's house and yet they still talk like the hidden army belongs to them. Who do they think they are? Hellion Vivian laughed. Old Master Hay's voice deepened. Wei, is this how you've been all these years? That mother and daughter pair are the worst. Hellion Vivian did not want to talk about Su Yenmo and the rest. Don't tell them that I got the hidden army first. Let's see what they want to do. Now that the imperial court is not stable, it's safer for the hidden army to keep a low profile. It won't be too late to let them out after we've made all the guns and ammunition. Speaking of your guns and ammunition, it's amazing. Old Master Hay pointed at De Xiong who was practicing outside. Especially that assault cannon that De Xiong is carrying, it can even smash rocks into pieces. Hellion Vivian was not surprised by the power of the assault cannon. After all, she knew its effect better than anyone else. However, Hellion Vivian did not expect it to be made so quickly. Are all of them done? There are still 1 or 2 items left, but most of them have been completed. I sent you this letter because I wanted you to come and take a look at our results, Old Master Hay said as he led Hellion Wei into the inner courtyard. The place was very secluded and covered with a layer of cut green branches. Open it. There were a total of 10 big wooden boxes. The high-quality guns were lined up in a row, shining with a cold black light. Hellion Vivian smiled as she bent down and picked up one of the guns. She pushed the gun and loaded it. Her skillful and fast movements had a unique handsomeness. Not bad. Other than the fact that the heavy machine gun was not as exquisite as the modern ones and would be more unbearable to carry on one's shoulders, there were no other problems. Dressed in military uniform, Qi Yan was standing not far away from her. His eyelids were slightly raised, and his slender legs gave people the feeling that they could crush everything. Hellion Vivian put down the gun in her hand and smiled at him. When Scarlet Flame walked in, his gaze fell on the collar around her neck. His long eyebrows furrowed. "What is this strange thing?" Hellion Vivian said, "Ah." She could not say that the third prince wanted to play a role, so she only said vaguely, "It's just a decoration." Using a dog collar as a decoration. When Qi Yan bent down, people could always smell the faint smell of gunpowder on his body. Hellion Vivian took a step back to avoid letting him touch her skin. Qi Yan looked at her, his eyes cold. "Did the third prince give it to you?" "How do you know?" Hellion Vivian was puzzled. Qi Yan sneered. Using this method to announce his possession suits his personality very well. "You know each other?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She did not think that they would know each other. Qi Yan's tone was indifferent. "We met once or twice in the palace. That person was not easy to get close to when he was young. It must be even more so when he grew up. He could not stand anyone touching his things. You can analyze the third prince's personality after meeting him once or twice. General Qi is indeed amazing." Hellion Vivian bent down and picked up another gun. Possession. So it was not the prey, but the possession. Hellion Vivian looked away. Qi Yan threw her a strange sentence. "It's not because I'm amazing, but because I'm also a man." All men had a desire to monopolize. But Su Yan did not intend to tell Hellion Vivian this. Because he was not used to Hellion Vivian now. He even did not want to give her to anyone. But he did not want to ruin other people's relationship. Let's wait. The selection of the secondary consort was about to begin. At that time, if this person wanted to leave, he would take her away. Chapter 390. Your Highness. In the corner of the inferior compound, Yun Biluo walked out from the shadows. She stared at the figure in front of her with undisguised adoration. Bailey Jiaju's hands did not stop undoing his sleeves. He looked at her coldly and asked, "Why are you here?" Yun Biluo bit her thin lips and looked helpless. "I know your highness is still mad at me. I'm here to remind your highness that Hellion Vivian doesn't want to stay by your side sincerely. I'm afraid that you'll be hurt. What's our business got to do with you?" It was the same answer, but Beligaju's voice was so cold that it made Yun Biluo shudder. She did not expect the two of them to have such chemistry. Suppressing the unwillingness in her heart, Yun Biluo looked at Bailey Jiaju with teary eyes and said, "She told me personally that it was just a pre-wedding deal between you two. Your Highness, you said that humans are the most selfish animals in the world. I really don't want to see you being used again." Used? Beligaju stood there quietly as if his entire movement had stopped. Then, he raised his eyebrows elegantly. "She told you that it was just a deal?" "Yes." Yun Biluo's eyes were filled with tenderness. She reached out to hug Beligaju. She knew that the man needed comfort the most now. With his long hair covering his eyes, Beligaju smiled deeply. "I don't mind being used by her. You better get out of here before I have the urge to kill." Yun Biluo was stunned and did not dare to take a step forward. Looking at his golden eyes, she stumbled out of the inferior compound. However, Bailey Jiaju only looked at his own bleeding finger. Waves of dull pain grew in his chest. To that woman, he was just being used. "Your Highness." Shadow knelt on the ground worriedly. Beligaju calmly retracted his arm and placed it by his side. He glanced at the person on the ground, making his expression invisible. "Follow her." "Yes." Shadow lowered his eyes. He was surprised that His Highness did not trust Miss Yun. Just a moment ago, he even felt a murderous aura. However, he did not understand why His Highness kept Miss Yun alive. In the past, he thought that it was because of their old relationship. Now it seemed that His Highness had other things he wanted to know about her. From the moment Helian Weiwei entered the room, she felt a little strange. Although the room was completely dark, she could still feel that there seemed to be someone here. Sure enough, when she looked up, she saw the silhouette of a person sitting on the chaise lounge. Under the faint moonlight, she could only see a slender figure, if not for the pair of eyes that reflected light like a cat's in the dark. Helian Vivian almost thought that she was hallucinating. It was obvious that Beligaju was sitting there. "Come here." His voice was not loud, and in the narrow space, it was so low that it made people's ears numb, but Helian Vivian could still hear the coldness in it. Helian Vivian turned her head and looked at Qing Zhan, who was behind her. "Qing Zhan, you can leave first. I want to talk to His Highness." "Yes." Qing Zhan was obviously a little worried. She frowned. However, she still left and did not forget to close the door before she left. Helian Vivian reached out and lit the oil lamp. Only then did she realize that beside Beligaju's hand was the package that she had packed for the full moon night. When she approached to tidy up those clothes, Bailey Jiaju unexpectedly curved those rare thin lips of his towards her. Helian Vivian immediately felt a demonic aura. She could not wait to take out the demon-revealing mirror to reveal his true form. "It's because I usually spoil you too much, that's why you have such big guts, isn't it?" Bailey Jiaju looked at her with a heavy gaze, his body still carrying the unconcealable smell of blood. Helian Vivian wanted to say something as his warm breath lingered around her ear. Bang! Beligaju pressed her on the table, the candlestick fell to the ground and made a series of clanking sounds. A dangerous aura was approaching, so close that Helian Vivian could clearly smell the faint mint sandalwood scent on his body. She did not know if it was because he had just woken up. His voice was slightly hoarse. "You really want to leave?" His voice was cold and ruthless. The intoxicating tea fragrance became hot. It was more like some kind of aphrodisiac. Helian Vivian could only turn her face away. She could not help but feel uncomfortable, especially when Beligaju was close to her. It was as if a fire was burning in her body, roasting her limbs until they were soft, and even her consciousness was gradually blurred. She looked at Beligaju in a daze. She just wanted to maintain her rationality and pretend that nothing was wrong. She was not deliberately trying to be brave, she just did not want him to see her in such a sorry state. "Let go of me first." He glanced at her, and the smile in his eyes gradually disappeared under the dim yellow light. He began to become incomparably cold again. "Why should this king let you go, so that you can leave now and fly away with someone else?" "Helian Vivian, to you, am I that easy to use? I used to think that you were stupid, but now..." "Ha!" A he was not contained in his words. "I am not using you." Helian Vivian felt that her strength was draining away, so she could only focus and reply, "We are helping each other. You were the one who agreed to the original contract." Bailey Jiaju stared blankly for a moment. When he first signed the contract, he wanted to find an excuse to feed this little fox until she was mature. He didn't expect that she would use it to shut his mouth again and again. Helian Vivian was a bit confused. She was confused for a while, then she sobered up a bit and wanted to push Beligaju away. "About the package, how do you explain it?" Bailey Jiaju exerted force with his left hand and trapped her in his arms. She couldn't even move an inch. Helian Vivian was a bit annoyed by the evil fire in her body, so she reached out and grabbed his collar, because they need a place to spend the night of the full moon. "This answer, Your Highness, should be satisfied." In order to prevent herself from pouncing on him, she tried her best to avoid the two of them meeting. This person kept coming in front of her, be careful that she really did what Yuan Ming said, and left after pouncing on him. Hellion Vivian had a bad temper, she was vengeful for the smallest grievance. She would not allow anyone to go against her when she wanted to eat or do something, so she had to have the same personality as a fox. No one knew better than Bailey Jiaju how domineering Hellion Wei Wei was. Don't be fooled by her thin figure. She was not afraid of him at all. This kind of bad-tempered person, now obediently curled up in his embrace, made Beligaju's chest feel completely suffocated. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's claws, and he smiled dangerously. Where are you going to spend the night? Chapter 391. Hellion Vivian didn't know what he wanted to do. The feeling of being trapped in his arms always made her feel unsafe. She just blurted out 5 words, the hot spring behind the mountain. You want to use the water to lower your temperature. Do you think that the day of dual cultivation is the same as being drugged? Can you solve it by just soaking in water? Beligaju looked at the small face in front of him and wondered how he fell in love with such a bad-tempered girl. Not only was her face dark, but she also didn't take him seriously. Thinking of this, Beligaju pinched her waist hard. He only felt that the skin under his palm was delicate and smooth. He couldn't help but touch it a few more times. The corners of his mouth curled up without him noticing. Hellion Vivian trembled and her waist and eyes went soft. But he seemed to be in the mood. He looked like he was teaching a disobedient subordinate. His fingers slid under her clothes. There was a slight friction between the skin and the itch slowly penetrated into the pores. He slowly raised his eyebrows. You are afraid. Hellion Vivian trembled and turned her head to the side. She seemed to smile, afraid. What's there to be afraid of? You know what I'm talking about. Beligaju's thin lips slid over her neck. Since you just came in, your body hasn't relaxed. Are you afraid that I will suddenly want you, or are you afraid that you will pounce on me and beg me to do you? Hellion Vivian was stimulated by his words and her body temperature became hotter. As they rubbed against each other, her body twisted. She hung on Beligaju's body and sat in Beligaju's arms. When she twisted around, she inevitably touched some parts that she shouldn't touch. So, she could only hold on tightly to his clothes. But Hellion Vivian didn't expect that she looked weak and helpless like this, which made people want to destroy her. Especially when she pulled open her collar due to the struggle, revealing her fair skin and black collar. Her beautiful deep collarbone looked seductive, and even the corners of her eyes were slightly pink. Beligaju's eyes darkened. He kissed her directly on the side of her ear and smiled enchantingly. Obviously, your body needs me more than soaking in the water. Hellion Vivian didn't know why her breathing became rapid. She felt that the surrounding temperature was a little too high, and even her back was a little hot. She wanted to avoid him, but Beligaju's lips stuck to her skin without any hindrance. Hellion Vivian felt all the pores on her body explode. Her mouth was so dry that she couldn't even spit out a single word for a moment. A thick and unique aura had filled the entire room at some point in time, urging on something. It was like the song of a siren. When people heard that charming voice, they had already fallen into the abyss. Hellion Vivian couldn't stand it anymore. She pulled Beligaju down and climbed up like a vine. She clung to him tightly and let out a silent sigh of comfort. There was a layer of water in her originally pale eyes. Beligaju, who was teased, seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He suddenly grabbed Hellion Vivian's waist with one hand, and his palm reached into her clothes to grope unscrupulously. He pinched her chin and lifted it up. Do you want it? Under the weak light, Hellion Vivian's face was red, and her eyes were like overflowing spring water. She couldn't hear what he was saying. Beligaju kissed her fiercely. Hellion Vivian softly leaned in his arms and slightly raised her head. Her lips and tongue responded shakily, and the kiss became lingering. One side plundered to their heart's content, while the other side took and asked. The ambiguous sound made people blush and their hearts beat faster. But they seemed to be unaware of it. Some feelings that couldn't be expressed when they were awake flowed into each other's hearts. Hellion Vivian had never been so docile. She let Beligaju plunder her body, but she still felt that it was far from enough. She just wanted to bury herself deeper in the man's arms. Her long legs couldn't help but rub again and again, like a silent and shy invitation. Beligaju's breathing became heavier, but his eyes were clearer than ever. "Tell me, who is the young Master Tang you are talking about? As long as you tell me, I will give it to you." This name was like a sobering agent implanted in Hellion Vivian's brain. It was only for a moment. There is no such person. Hellion Vivian's eyes were cold. She grabbed her wrist and twisted it hard. Kacha, a soft sound was heard. Beligaju's whole body trembled. He reached out and pulled her over. "What are you doing?" Hellion Vivian gathered some reason and strength from the pain. She pushed away Beligaju, who was unprepared, and staggered back with the help of the reaction force. Her waist bumped into the sharp corner of the table. She groaned, but the corners of her mouth curved up. Hellion Wei's mind was filled with scattered fragments of memories. She only knew that when she fell into a deep sleep, she still maintained her original nature and did not reveal that she was the one who had taken over her body, so that the other party would not treat her as a monster and loathe her. That was enough. The moonlight shone through the wooden window and shone on Beligaju's pale face. Those who didn't know would think that the injured person wasn't Hellion Vivian lying on the bed, but him. Bailey Jiaju had never thought that she would resort to self-mutilation to reject his question. Just because of that, young Master Tang. He had never felt so empty like this before. It seemed that no matter what he did, he couldn't hold the person in front of him. That was because she had too many secrets. She didn't want him to know every single one of them. Beligaju got up and put one hand in his pocket. He arrogantly looked at the night outside the window. His long black hair set off his perfect ice-cold face. He was as elegant and indifferent as usual, but his fingers were clenched tighter and tighter. Fire Chelan's figure was faintly visible behind him. It looked at Hellion Vivian in surprise. There was actually such a tenacious human in this world. Master had already released his psychedelic aura. She could still resist the temptation before the full moon. One had to know that Master had never done this before. Because releasing the psychedelic aura was not suitable for Master right now. Using his own aura to affect the other's aura would consume a lot of energy. But what it didn't expect was that Master would go to this extent for a human. It's probably because Master also sensed that within Wei's body, there was something unstable causing mischief. That's why he used up his own cultivation to help her suppress it. The night was getting darker and darker. The injured Hellion Vivian's dream was gloomy. The real Hellion Vivian looked at her with eyes full of tears. It was as if she was blaming her for taking away everything that belonged to her. This time, someone reached out and seemed to want to drag her to the bottom of the lake. Hellion Vivian struggled with all her might to stand up. She felt as if her body was surrounded by an unknown aura. That was why she was able to survive. But the lake in her dream was too deep. It was so deep that when she woke up, she felt cold all over. Chapter 392. Because of the dream, Hellion Wei's eyebrows were knitted together. Her black hair was wet with sweat and stuck to her forehead. Of course, Bailey Jiaju was also aware of this kind of movement. He held her firmly in his arms and kissed her domineeringly, with a sense of punishment as if he was venting his anger. Helene Vivian let out a muffled cry of pain, but he took advantage of the opening to bite her lips. Ugh! Ugh! He seemed to be really angry. Helene Vivian vaguely thought about how the royal family was going to punish her this time. She heard him whisper in her ear, "If you hurt yourself again, I'll take advantage of you when you're unconscious." There was actually a hint of hoarseness in his voice, as if he couldn't get what he wanted. Helene Vivian didn't dare to look at Beligaju's face. Her broken left hand had been fixed in advance. She only tilted her head and wiped the remaining silver strands on the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. She used so much strength that her skin turned red. "Don't wipe anymore." Beligaju pressed her hand down. The corner of his mouth was a little bitter. Did she dislike his kiss that much? Resentment, jealousy, grievance, and other conflicting feelings spiraled and grew stronger, hitting his chest until it was a little dull. Helene Vivian nodded. She was still a little confused. She didn't understand how she and Beligaju had come to this point. Just as her thoughts were running wild, Helene Vivian heard Beligaju take a deep breath. His long and beautiful eyes opened and his voice was deep. "If you don't want to sleep, then let's do something else." That voice was sexy and hoarse. Helene Vivian only felt a little numb in her ears. She didn't need to think to know what something else was. She covered her head with the quilt and slept very obediently. She didn't want to let him touch her. Beligaju gritted his teeth as he looked at that lazy figure. He was so jealous that he almost bubbled. He almost blurted out a question, but in an instant, he saw Helene Vivian's expression. Her thin lips were pursed and her face was slightly red. She seemed to be a little nervous. Ha! How rare. Even a cunning fox would be nervous. The two of them slept on the same bed. He held her in his arms and rested his chin on the top of her head, but his eyes were full of coldness. When Helene Vivian woke up, the space beside her was already empty, leaving only the dampness of the quilt. She was stunned at first, then she called Qing Zhan over. She heard someone say that His Highness probably went back to the palace to prepare for the selection of the secondary consort. She felt lucky that Beligaju asked him about that person's name yesterday. No one knew that everyone in the Tang sect had gone through a lot of training before joining the Tang sect. Once someone tried to get information about young Master Tang, they would be able to find out who he was. Their bodies would react in the most basic way. Of course. For Helene Vivian, even if there was no such training, she wouldn't say that person's name either. Because in the 21st century, he was the only person she wanted to protect. However, what happened yesterday? Helene Vivian asked Yuan Ming, "Didn't you say that there would only be a reaction on the night of the full moon?" Yuan Ming laughed evilly. There was a change in the qi. That man had a scent that would make the demon cultivator obsessed. So, we still have to isolate him. Helene Vivian reached out and pressed her aching forehead. Yuan Ming suddenly stood up straight. "Something's wrong." "What?" As soon as Helene Vivian finished speaking, she heard an ear-piercing scream from the superior compound. The scream was very unusual. Through the sound of the rain, it seemed to have an indescribable fear. Murder, murder. Someone had indeed died, and the way she died was very strange. All the blood in her body had evaporated in an extremely strange way. Her whole body appeared to be sunken and shriveled. You could even see the few bones left after removing the blood. Helene Vivian frowned as she looked at the corpse in front of her. A lot of doubts gradually emerged in her heart. However, her reason didn't let her show the slightest bit of inappropriateness. Her pair of eyes only deepened as she quickly analyzed. The victim's age was 17 to 19 years old. She died from a large amount of blood loss. The time of death was between 9 and 1 o'clock yesterday. There were no obvious signs of injury on the surface of the body. The body was in good condition. The fine and soft things were enough to rule out the possibility of murder. It was just that the way this corpse died was too strange. Intuition made people feel uncomfortable in their hearts. The murder happened at White Academy, which was still some distance away from the capital. The people from the Yamen couldn't have come immediately. Helly and Vivian obtained almost all the information from the scene of the first murder. The person who had died was the young miss of the Bai family, who had a good family background. Her appearance was also decent. During this period of time, she had been practicing the zither in her room. According to the servant girl, she wanted to participate in the upcoming selection in the capital, so she practiced the zither with all her might, wanting to stand out in the selection. When the servant girl was talking, she was crying all the time. Helly and Vivian took advantage of this time and walked around the entire room. The strange thing was that the doors and windows were all locked from the inside. There was no trace of being opened. Even the floor was clean. There were no traces of fighting. Except for the dead person lying on the floor, everything was very normal. This case was really strange. At the beginning, she suspected that it must be a fierce master, so it could be so straightforward. But until she remembered that it was raining outside last night, she felt that her idea was wrong. The martial chi of the royal family was already very high, but even if they went out, it was inevitable that they would be contaminated with the humidity outside. Even now it was the same. It was still raining outside. No matter who entered the room, there should be traces on the floor. Unless the murderer didn't come in from outside, this murder case looked simple, but in fact it was very complicated. It was very obvious that this was a tricky case of murder in a locked room. Helly and Vivian did not handle many cases, but she knew that among all the murder cases, murder in a locked room was the most troublesome. However, this case fell on the head of the battle spirit forces. This has not happened in the White Academy for more than 100 years. Tu Su Feng glanced at the 4 new members standing opposite him, which included Helly and Vivian, Yun Biluo, Xiao Qi, and Han Yu. The people from the Yamen will come up the mountain soon. Tu Su Feng said in a low voice, I'm very familiar with their methods. When they find the traces, the whole academy will be in chaos. Han Yu's eyes flashed. Dean, you mean that you think there will be more murders? It's very possible. Tu Su Feng's eyes darkened. In order to prevent more people from being killed, you must find the murderer as soon as possible. Also, you can't reveal your identities. Yes. The reply in unison echoed in the underground palace. Hellion Wei Wei furrowed her brows. Chapter 393. I feel that this is not an ordinary murder case. Coming out of the underground palace, Yuan Ming's tone was a lot heavier. Helly and Vivian stopped in her tracks. What do you mean? Do you still remember the fog we saw at Green Dragon Lake last night? Yuan Ming lowered his voice and said, those are all produced from the intertwining of resentment. What the other party wants to do is to destroy the auspicious aura of the White Academy. However, the auspicious aura is not that easy to destroy, unless the other party is able to produce enough resentment in a short period of time. It is very obvious that today's murder case is only the beginning. Following this, there will be more people who will be harmed. As Yuan Ming was speaking, the magistrate arrived in a grandiose manner. Seeing the students of the superior compound, he bowed and bowed. But once he saw the corpse, he was somewhat unhappy. Originally, he was in charge of White Academy's security issues, and the higher-ups would always look for him to talk from time to time. Now that there was a murder case here, he just wanted to clean up this place as soon as possible and suppress the murder case as much as possible. However, it was very obvious that the magistrate's calculations were wrong. A murder case occurred in their own residence. How could the students not care? Each of them had a different expression and asked the magistrate to give them an explanation. How could the magistrate offend the students of the superior compound? So he said to the coroner, "Since everyone wants to know, you tell them what you found." "Yes." The coroner cupped his hands and walked over. It was only a group of students who did not have common sense, so it was not easy to fool them. He smiled a bit, with a bit of arrogance. The deceased's age was between 17 and 19 years old. He died from excessive blood loss. The time of death was between 9 and 1 o'clock yesterday. There wasn't anything wrong with what he said at the beginning, but the next sentence made Wei Wei's eyebrows raise. The deceased's appearance was outstanding. It is very likely that someone failed in courtship and wanted to kill. Helene Vivian did not say anything. Looking at the coroner's appearance, she knew that this guy was definitely talking nonsense. The coroner did not have the slightest intention of stopping. Looking around, he pretended to be deep in thought. White Academy locks every night, except for the students who live here. It is very difficult for others to break in. When the coroner said this, everyone gasped. Some of the students couldn't help but ask, "Master, are you saying that the murderer is in the academy?" It was very possible that a fellow student who studied together was a scoundrel who was aroused by lust. This made those young ladies from the superior compound extremely uneasy. "You look at me, I look at you." Their complexions were extremely pale. They never would have thought that something like this would happen when the consort selection was just around the corner. The coroner didn't know that his words would cause such a big reaction. He waved his hand and said, "I'm just guessing. We need to continue investigating to know the cause of death. However, we can be sure that the murderer is a man." Helene Vivian didn't want to get involved, but this case had a huge impact. If the coroner made people think that they only needed to be careful of men and didn't need to guard against women, then the students would be led astray. Therefore, she laughed softly. "From what you're saying, this classmate's death must have been due to her beautiful appearance, which led to the fatal disaster." The coroner didn't think that someone would interrupt at this time. He glanced at Helene Vivian and said somewhat impatiently, "Of course. Since you're so sure, this student doesn't understand one thing." Helene Vivian's voice was indifferent. Since someone was aroused by lust, then why wasn't the deceased's clothes damaged in the slightest? The coroner was stunned. Only now did he notice the details that Helene Vivian said. If it was normal times, he wouldn't have noticed it. However, this time, he saw that the master wanted to settle this matter as soon as possible, so he didn't investigate in detail. The coroner didn't recognize Helene Vivian. He only felt that a woman had pointed out his mistake in front of everyone, making him somewhat embarrassed. The students weren't ordinary people who didn't know anything. Now that they heard Helene Vivian's analysis, they all looked at the coroner, waiting for a reasonable explanation. The coroner steadied his mind and said to Helene Vivian, "You don't need to argue with this old man. Once this old man has carefully examined the corpse, the truth will naturally come to light. However, the culprit must be among you all." After he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and walked to the side of the magistrate. He cupped his hands and said, "My lord, this old man begs you to send more soldiers to the academy. Firstly, they can protect the other students, and secondly, they can prevent the culprit from escaping. We'll do as the coroner says." The prefectural magistrate waved his hand in satisfaction. He had thought further than the coroner. He did not care whether he could catch the murderer or not, as long as the prince ordered him to keep an eye on the White Academy's movements during this period of time. He could take this opportunity to send more soldiers to the academy. Yuan Ming looked at this scene and his eyes lit up. "Woman, do you want to consider leaving this place?" "Now?" Helene Vivian knew that Yuan Ming wouldn't ask her to leave for no reason. She raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why?" Yuan Ming said in a low voice, "This is most likely a burial mound made by the Taoists." Helene Vivian heard Yuan Ming's words and frowned. In ancient times, what was called a burial mound was a large group of graves. In other words, it wasn't as simple as one or two small burial mounds. At least an entire family had to die to qualify. Once the burial mound is started, it can't be stopped. It will only be considered complete when the last person in the array is dead. It's not too late for you to leave now. The resentment will have a great impact on you now. Yuan Ming glanced at the magistrate who had just left. His eyes were filled with mockery. "I don't believe that those humans can find the source within 2 days. In 2 more nights, the moon will be full. You won't be able to withstand it." Helene Vivian knew that Yuan Ming was right, but she felt that she couldn't just leave like this. "How about we evacuate the students first? This so-called burial mound means that no matter where they go, they will be in this burial mound." Yuan Ming looked at her and said calmly, "I can help you cover your scent with my demonic nature, but the others can't. Even if they leave here, they will die." Helene Vivian lowered her eyes. She thought for a while and said, "So, if I want to live, I have to find the source." "Yes." Yuan Ming smiled evilly. "You want to find it?" Helene Vivian nodded lazily. "I haven't used my brain for a long time. According to what you just said, letting them stay in the academy will narrow the search area, right?" "That's right." Yuan Ming thought that she was worthy of being his prey. She was unexpectedly smart. Helene Vivian went through the collected information in her mind. When she passed by the back of the mountain, she glanced at the Green Dragon Lake. Raindrops fell on it, but it didn't sound clear at all. The light was also hazy, as if there was a layer of gauze. Chapter 394. At this moment, at the crime scene of the Superior compound, a woman shook her head, her long curly hair covered her pretty face. Her action was a little strange, as if she was a puppet being manipulated. The few soldiers who stayed behind did not suspect anything. They had already heard the coroner's words and identified the murderer as a man. Then, the moment the wooden door was closed, a gust of wind suddenly blew past and lifted the woman's long hair in front of her, revealing her small, pointy face. What kind of expression was that? Her eyes were empty, and there was nothing in them. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth, and it was indescribably eerie. She was the next one. Another person died in the White Academy. In just one day, 2 people had died, and this was under the protection of the soldiers. Like the previous victim, all the blood in this corpse was gone, leaving only the skin and bones. Helene Vivian squatted down and touched the corpse's sleeve with her fingers. It was still warm. In other words, it was not long since the victim was killed, Your Highness. Not waiting for Helene Wei to get up, a gentle and soft voice sounded at the side of her ear. Helene Vivian looked back and saw Yun Biluo talking to Beligaju under the flowering tree. "The academy is not safe now. It's better for Your Highness to go back to the palace." Yun Biluo did not understand why His Highness came back when he had already left the academy. Murders kept happening here, it was definitely not safe. After all, his identity was different from others. If an accident happened here, wouldn't it give a chance to those who were eyeing the throne? At this distance, others could not hear what they were talking about. They could only see the side of their faces. Someone said enviously, "I heard that Sister Yun and His Highness went to the palace together today. It seems that they are going to reconcile. His Highness is always more patient with Sister Yun than others." The position of secondary consort must be Sister Yun. I'm afraid someone will be anxious. Their voices weren't loud to begin with. It seemed that they were deliberately saying it for Hellion Vivian to hear. But what annoyed them was that Hellion Vivian did not react at all. The faint smile at the corner of his mouth made them even more unwilling. If a woman like Yun Biluo became the third princess consort, they would have nothing to say. But it had to be such an ugly woman. Hellion Vivian ignored the two men. Her time was precious. Wait, what was that? Hellion Vivian squatted down and looked at the arm of the deceased. Black spots. Why are you standing here? The Yamen runners who were carrying the corpse were already irritable. Now that they saw a student standing in their way, their tone became even more unfriendly. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She quickly stood up. The bailiffs walked forward cursing. Thinking about it, it was really bad luck. Accidents happened one after another, and there was no end to the deaths. When the time came, the Lord would definitely be angry. If the Lord was angry, how could they, as subordinates, live a good life? He didn't know who the culprit was. How could he be so ruthless? According to the autopsy, all the people who died this time had their blood sucked dry for some reason. Although the officials were not gods with profound martial qi, they knew that sucking other people's blood to enhance one's martial qi was a forbidden curse in the divine mainland. No matter who the culprit was, there must be something terrible. The Yamen runners shuddered at the same time. They took a look at the corpse that was being carried and hurried out of the superior compound. Hellion Wei Wei retracted her gaze from the few Yamen runners and saw Yun Biluo looking at her with a pitiful expression. Miss Wei Wei, please help me persuade His Highness to return to the palace. I don't have time. Hellion Vivian only gave her 4 words coldly and walked past the two of them. She really admired Yun Biluo's shamelessness. From a distance, she could still hear Yun Biluo's gentle coughing voice, Your Highness. Bailey Jia Ju did not speak, but his expression became even colder. Even his pair of eyes were suffused with a thick chill. Yun Biluo clenched her fists. She had talked for so long, but it was no match for that woman who walked past him. However, it was also thanks to that woman that His Highness was able to understand her kindness even more. Yun Biluo lowered her eyes, her heart overflowing with joy. Balikaju opened his mouth and said, Get out of the way. What? Yun Biluo widened her eyes in shock. Balikaju glanced at her indifferently. His casual posture was more languid and luxurious than ordinary people. I said, Get out of the way. The 4 cold words made Yun Biluo completely freeze. He didn't stop just to listen to her. Then he did it to see Hellion Vivian. This guess made Yun Biluo bite her lip, and her shoulders trembled. In the end, her eyes darkened. It seemed that it was still not enough. At noon, just as Hellion Vivian stepped into the commercial compound and was about to have lunch, a noise that could not be ignored came from the lobby. A student walked in with bright eyes. I heard that the Yamen has found some clues. What? Hellion Wei Wei stopped in her tracks and turned to look at the student who spoke. The others also gathered around and asked curiously, What clues? Don't worry, let me catch my breath first. The student who ran in took a deep breath and said, Before Bai Xinrui returned to her room, she went to a place. Where would she go in the middle of the night? Someone was puzzled. Hellion Vivian suddenly had a very bad feeling. The student said mysteriously, She went to Green Dragon Lake. I heard that young Master He was there too. That means the last person Bai Xinrui saw before she died was young Master He. Are you saying that young Master He is the murderer? The people in the lobby were in an uproar. The student lowered his voice, I don't know if he's the murderer, but the magistrate is going to take him away. It seems that he has determined that young Master Hay is guilty. Upon hearing this, Helene Vivian's eyes darkened. Without any delay, she turned and left the commercial compound and walked toward the inferior compound. She was not afraid of anything else, but she was afraid that the magistrate would let Hay Zay be the scapegoat in order to close the case quickly. The Hay family was powerful in the business circle of the capital city and had plenty of money. However, it was obvious that someone was manipulating this case behind the scenes. The Hay family might not be able to defeat the other party. Otherwise, the magistrate would not be so bold as to take him away. In this strange world, she did not have many family members. Hay Zay protected her in every way in the academy. Not to mention that if she did not ask him to watch Green Dragon Lake, he would not be taken away as a suspect. She could not wait any longer. Bang! Helene Vivian pushed open the wooden door in front of her. Bailey Jiaju was unbuttoning his shirt when he heard the noise. He slowly raised his eyes, but his expression was definitely not pleasant. He merely looked at Helene Wei Wei, who was standing in front of the door. Chapter 395. Helene Vivian paused her steps and thought for a moment before opening her mouth. I need your help. What help? Beligaju's tone was very indifferent, with a trace of coldness compared to usual. Helene Vivian felt that bringing up this request would be disadvantageous to him, but she could only do so. Hay Zay has been caught as a murderer. That magistrate simply wants to find a scapegoat to settle this matter. There should be someone behind him. If there is no one with a higher status to suppress him, he will definitely continue to be unbridled. Beligaju did not speak, only stopping the movement of his hands. He tilted his head to look at her, his eyes filled with endless iciness. Helene Vivian recalled that he had warned her countless times not to get too close to Hay Zay, so she inevitably felt a little guilty. I know that letting you intervene in this matter at White Academy will cause unnecessary trouble, but I can't just watch Hay Zay get caught like this. He is not the murderer. This is the first time you've asked me for help. Beligaju's slightly cold voice sounded in the room, like ice-cold sake slowly rotating. But it is for another man. Helene Vivian raised her head and looked towards the man. Beligaju still had an indifferent and noble appearance. The exquisitely made robe draped over his body, straight to the side of his feet. He slightly tilted his face, his eyes filled with bottomless darkness. Obviously, he still had the imposing manner of a monarch overlooking the world. Helene Vivian did not know what was wrong. Perhaps it was because his eyes were too desolate, there was not a single reflection of the blue dome of heaven. Helene Wei Wei's chest tightened involuntarily, as if she was affected by his appearance. Even the air around her became silent. After a long while, Beligaju stood up and walked towards her step by step. That attractive handsome face was like a perfectly cut ice diamond, dazzling and sharp. If I help you, what can I get in return? The throne. Helene Vivian looked at him, her eyes dark. I will do my best to help you sit on that throne. Beligaju laughed, but it was as cold as a sword. Do you think that without you, I won't be able to get that position? Or do you think that I must have that position? Helene Vivian didn't say anything. Of course, she knew that even without her, the man in front of her could easily obtain the world's throne. It was only a matter of time. When you need me, you can come here. If you don't, you can just throw me aside. Beligaju forced her into a corner and lowered his head slightly. The smell of sandalwood was followed by an indescribable coldness. Why do you have to take all the good things in the world? Helene Vivian clung to that unsettling heat, wanting to end this situation as soon as possible. When she looked up, Her eyes were clearer than ever. Your Highness has decided to help me. Seeing the rare anxious look on the girl's face, Bailey Hanbing snorted coldly with a faint smile. You are really worried about him. He let go of her hand with so much force that Hellion Vivian almost lost her balance. Fortunately, she didn't like to pretend to be weak like Yun Biluo. Otherwise, the royal family's strength would be enough to throw her out. Hellion Vivian pressed her aching wrist, listening to the man said coldly, I can help you, but in return, I want you to promise me one thing. Okay. This time, she owed him. You promised so quickly. She didn't know what she did wrong. Hellion Vivian could see that Beligaju's eyes were getting colder. He looked at her with an almost arrogant look. His eyes were cold. It seems that he is really important to you. Hellion Vivian didn't deny it. She only wanted to save him now. Beligaju took a deep look at her again. His long sleeves moved slightly, and his voice was so calm that it was almost cold. Shadow. Yes, Your Highness. Shadow passed by the treetops and knelt on the ground with one knee. Bailey Jiaju took out a token and said, Go and find out where the magistrate is now. Show this to him and tell him not to simply arrest people as a scapegoat. If he does this kind of thing too often, be careful of his official position. Yes. Shadow took the order and stood up immediately. But before he left, he deliberately looked at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian knew that Shadow was blaming her. His last look was too obvious. She also knew that her request this time was a little too much. This kind of decision was very likely to get Bailey Jiaju into trouble. She was just a little anxious and wanted to give it a try. She didn't expect that he would agree. Hellion Vivian thought for a while and said, If Your Highness needs me in the future, I'll do anything for you. If I don't want you to do that, then I want you to accompany me in bed. Beligaju took off his outer robe and threw it aside in a cold voice. Hellion Vivian choked on her words. Little seventh prince, who walked in with the hidden beast, saw this scene. Third brother was obviously in a bad mood. Yes. Why don't I just quietly step back? It had to be said that little seventh prince's idea was wise. But he wanted to hide while dragging such a big thing. Ha! Dream on. Beligaju looked at the little one who was in a dilemma and raised an eyebrow. Come here. The little one shuddered and walked over. He didn't forget to share the food. Third brother, I caught a hidden beast to make lunch for you. Unfortunately, Beligaju wasn't a foodie like him. I thought you would be in the palace right now. The academy is a mess, don't you know? The little one rubbed his tiger head guiltily. Then, he saw his third sister-in-law standing at the side and automatically walked over with his short legs. He squatted in a corner with Hellion Vivian and stood in a row. At the same time, he was stared at by two pairs of round eyes, one big and one small. His Highness didn't feel anything at all. His cold side profile had a faint indifference as he casually drank the tea in his hand. From time to time, he would flip through the ancient book in his hand. His posture was languid and luxurious, and extremely beautiful. Occasionally, when he stopped, he would glance to the side indifferently. One could successfully see the adult and the child immediately stand up straight, full of vigilance. Even their movements seemed to be in sync with each other. Beligaju calmly retracted his gaze. Little Seventh heaved a sigh of relief. His heart was thumping wildly. He thought angrily to himself, it's fine if he's reading a book, but why did he have to look in our direction? He was so scared that he couldn't breathe. Third brother is so scary. Regarding this point, Wei Wei also felt the same way. She always felt that the oppressive feeling emitted from Bailey Jiaju's body was unusually strong. Even when drinking tea, she had to constantly be on guard against any movements he might make. Chapter 396. At this moment, the magistrate was sitting in his sedan, analyzing the current situation. The suspect had been caught. The murderer was most likely young Master He, the last person who came into contact with the victim. As for how the second student died, he did not care at all. As long as the case was pinned on one person, the case could be closed. Young Master He's identity was a little tricky. However, there was no other way. He had been to the Green Dragon Lake. According to the prince, anyone who had been to the Green Dragon Lake had to be secretly executed. He was supported by the prince. Compared to the He family, he was more afraid of offending the prince. While the magistrate was thinking, the carriage suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" the magistrate shouted impatiently. The manservant respectfully handed over a token. The token was not big, and it was just enough to be held in one hand. On the surface, there was nothing special about it. However, the words written on it made the magistrate lose his footing and almost collapse in the carriage. His Majesty has arrived in person. The magistrate's first reaction was to wonder if the retired emperor had found out that he had cooperated with the prince and had come to punish him personally. The servant had never seen his master so nervous before. His face had turned deathly pale, and he no longer had his usual domineering attitude. The magistrate opened the letter with trembling fingers. His face was completely pale. It was the royal family. After reading the letter, the magistrate froze. He could not stop the chill in his heart and he almost fell to the ground. He did not want to go any further. The prince. Only the prince could save him now. The magistrate pulled the curtain open and shouted anxiously, "Turn around, turn around. Don't go to the academy. Tell them to release young Master He immediately. Don't go to the academy. But we finally have a clue for this case." The coroner sitting next to him did not know what was going on. The magistrate gnashed his teeth. "Why bother with the case now? I'm afraid I can't even keep my life. Turn around quickly and go to the Murong mansion." Drip, drip, drip. The rain fell on the banana leaves. Apart from Murong Wang, there was also a handsome man in white sitting in the Murong palace. The prefectural magistrate was drenched from head to toe. When he saw the man, he was shocked at first. Then, he handed over the token in his hand. "Young master, do you recognize this?" The man looked at the token and didn't say anything. He just narrowed his eyes slightly and a deep look flashed across his eyes. King Murong could not stand still. There was fear on his face, but there was also a viciousness that could not be concealed. "This is the third prince's token." Yes, this lowly official entered the White Academy to handle a case this time. "It seems that I have offended him and caught someone who shouldn't be caught. With the means of the royal family, they will definitely know that I didn't have the emperor's permission and cooperated with the prince to privately transfer the officers and soldiers of the Ministry of Appointments. Your Highness, you must save me, Your Highness." After confirming that it was a member of the royal family, the magistrate panicked even more. "Don't worry, I will protect you." Emperor Murong patted the magistrate's shoulder. "The fifth prince will remember your kindness." The magistrate wiped the sweat on his forehead and smiled in relief. He knew that all these years of offerings would not be in vain. The fifth prince was different from the third prince. Although he was young, he always knew how to be an official and to be in a position of power. If everyone was as conceited as the third prince, how could this network of connections be opened? That was why when King Murong intentionally or unintentionally hinted at him, he chose to stand on the fifth prince's side. Then, this lowly official will thank your highness first. The magistrate kowtowed. King Murong helped him up and said, "Go back first and wait for my order. Don't be too anxious." Yes. The magistrate retreated respectfully. King Murong narrowed his eyes and looked at the magistrate's back. The corner of his mouth lifted in satisfaction. So what if the third prince's talent is extraordinary? Without the support of his relatives, no matter how amazing his martial chi and talent are, he will not be able to break the situation of officials protecting each other. The rules passed down by the ancestors were to be obeyed. The third prince's faction was just wishful thinking. It was like hitting a rock with an egg. However, at this moment, the other side was in full swing. He still needed his master to make a decision for him. Because as the magistrate had said, if someone found out that he was trying to mobilize the capital's imperial guards, he would face the great crime of being beheaded. "Master, what do you think I should do now?" The man gently turned the cup in his palm and took a sip. He said casually, "Since your highness is ready to do it, why don't you take advantage of this opportunity to finish it?" King Murong paused. He looked at the man in disbelief. "Young. Master, you mean, what I mean is not important. The key is what your highness thinks." The man lowered his voice. The eerie wind blew into Quan Zhengji's ears. "If the third prince is no longer around, your highness and the crown prince will be safe and sound. What do you think, your highness?" Hearing this, King Murong understood. His master was asking him to take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the third prince. King Murong shuddered and almost spilled the tea in his hand. The man held his hand at the right time and smiled. "Your highness, why are you panicking? How many people know about what happened to the third prince in the academy? No one knows that you're going to send troops. Even if they know, they're only going to solve a case. As long as it's done cleanly, not only will the empress be released from the cold palace, even the fifth prince will inherit the throne in the future." "You're right, master." King Murong did not wait for the man to finish. He said in a sinister voice, "A great man must be ruthless. If it wasn't for the third prince, his younger brother would not have been caught and his younger sister would not have been banished to the cold palace. As long as the third prince was alive, his nephew would not be able to ascend the throne. Why don't I just kill him? As long as he did it cleanly, no one would know." However, the third prince's martial chi was invincible. He had no idea how to take down such a master. The man took a sip of tea and decided to help him to the end. Every year, the military department will have a military exercise. It's normal to exercise at the foot of the mountain. No one will suspect why your highness chose to exercise at Green Dragon Mountain. When the time comes, your highness just needs to cut off the connection between the White Academy and the outside world. With the help of the magistrate, you can directly encircle and annihilate the White Academy. Isn't it easy to kill the third prince? That's right. No matter how powerful the third prince was, how could he fight against thousands of armored soldiers? In addition, he could ask the magistrate to poison the water in the well. When the time comes, wouldn't it be easy to kill him? King Murong finally made up his mind. Since he was going to do it, he must make it so that the third prince could not escape. Chapter 397. Rumble. Thunder rumbled. It was only noon, but the sky outside was gray and gloomy. Helene Vivian did not stay at Beligaju's for long, because she still had things to do. According to Yuan Ming, the Dead Man Mound was an evil formation built by piling up corpses. Since it needed corpses, there would definitely be people who would continue to die. What she needed to do now was to gather everyone together and not let them be alone. Because once they were alone, it would give the murderer a chance to attack. Therefore, as soon as Wei Wei left the inferior compound, the first thing she had to do was to let Tu Su Feng give the order to have all the students gather together. Those ladies from the superior compound were the hardest to please. They could not stand the rainy weather and had to stay in the stuffy tea house lobby with everyone else. What's wrong with the dean? Why did he listen to that ugly woman? Who knows, Sister Yun? Do you think it's meaningful for her to let us gather like this? Yun Biluo shook her head and coughed twice, looking like she was suffocated. This made the dissatisfied voices around them even louder. Wei Wei swept a glance at those few people who were full of complaints and suddenly smiled devilishly. Previously, teacher also said that the murderer is inside White Academy. Based on the current situation, whoever is alone, it will attack that person. Now, the reason for gathering everyone here is very simple. It is to prevent the murderer from continuing his attack. If any of you are not afraid of death, you can leave. Just this one sentence made those young ladies shut their mouths completely. They looked at each other and coughed softly. They no longer said anything about leaving. Oh, humans are really afraid of death. Yuan Ming looked at the lobby and sneered sarcastically. Helene Vivian tapped her leg with her fingers. This was a common action when she was thinking. As long as the effect is achieved, the range is smaller. That person should be in the middle of them. That was right. This was Helene Vivian's real purpose. In order not to alert the enemy, Helene Vivian deliberately said that to prevent the murderer from attacking. In fact, that was only a very small part of it. More importantly, they couldn't always wait until the murderer came to them before they realized it. They had to fight back and hunt. I've seen the corpses, Helene Vivian said as she walked towards the group of students. Both of them have black spots on their bodies. I keep feeling that something is wrong. Yuan Ming frowned. What do you mean? Just as Helene Vivian was about to speak, He Zhe was brought back, followed by two Yamen runners. He looked calm and stood in the hall with an outstanding temperament. He did not look like a prisoner who had been taken away, but more like someone who had just gone out for a walk. Helene Vivian looked at him from left to right. After confirming that he was not injured, she said, I have something to ask you. He eyes raised his good-looking eyebrows and glanced at the Yamen runner who left. He lowered his voice and asked, is it related to this case? Helene Vivian's eyes flashed. How do you know? Because I did see something that day. He eyes narrowed his eyes. The reason why the magistrate wanted to take me away is probably because of this. Let's sit down and talk. Okay. Helene Wei Wei nodded, but when she raised her eyes, she saw a silhouette standing outside the door. Wearing pure white clothes, he exuded an ascetic demonic charm, not a trace of emotion leaked out. He only looked at her indifferently, the light in his eyes was as cold as ice. Little Seven was also there, but he was sitting in the tea house, stupidly eating the meat bun in his hand. He felt that there was nothing more delightful than having food, so he didn't notice the strange atmosphere between his third brother and third sister-in-law. Beligaju only glanced at Helene Vivian, then walked past the tea house and back to the inferior compound. Helene Wei Wei was somewhat dazed by his gaze. However, she remembered that Heizei might have important clues, so she didn't worry too much. Once she sat down, she lowered her voice and asked, "What did you actually see that day?" Someone in the White Academy was in contact with evil beasts. He eyes glanced at the students on the first floor. Although it was far away and I couldn't see it clearly, there was definitely the aura of a demon beast beside the Green Dragon Lake that day. That's not what I want to say. What I want to say is that the young lady of the Bai family who died was very strange. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. How strange. That night, she didn't notice me, but I saw her. He eyes frowned and tried hard to recall. She walked back and forth by the Green Dragon Lake. She seemed to be talking to herself, but at the same time, she seemed to be talking to something. But that day, there was no one else beside the Green Dragon Lake except her. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She looked at He eyes and her eyes darkened. I know what happened. What happened? He eyes still did not understand. Hellion Vivian went downstairs and said, the murderer of these murders was not someone else, but the victims themselves. Because there was a dirty thing possessing their bodies, that's why there was a murder in a locked room. In fact, that thing would change its target and throw away their bodies after absorbing all their resentment. We must find that thing, or else it would be useless even if the people died and it didn't die. That's easy for you to say. He eyes looked at the hundreds of people in front of him. How do we find it? How do we know who has that thing? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and glanced around the floor. Suddenly, she thought of something. Look at the shadow. The possessed person will have one more shadow than the average person. He eyes smiled playfully. How did his adopted sister develop such a brain? How could she be so smart? Hellion Vivian was right. Looking at the shadow was the fastest way to find the demon-transforming beast. Unfortunately, before they started to search, a teacher said. One of the students fainted because it was too hot here, so he went to the private room on the second floor to rest. Resting alone at this time. Hellion Vivian did not think that anyone would be so daring. She suddenly frowned and ran directly to the second floor. At this moment, a faint noise came from the depths of the corridor. Hellion Vivian's face froze and walked toward that direction. The sound seemed to be coming from the private room, accompanied by the sound of raindrops, reverberating intermittently. Hellion Vivian leaned against the wooden door and turned around abruptly. Her phoenix-like eyes scanned every inch of the private room. No one. Hellion Vivian looked at the open window again. The window was facing the direction where Beligaju had just left. Chapter 398. There was a loud bang. The loud noise interrupted An Ying's report. Beligaju, who was sitting on the wooden chair, glanced out of the window and ordered casually, "Continue." An Ying lowered his eyes and said, "There is nothing else." The magistrate released them without any hesitation. Beligaju's face was expressionless as he listened to An Ying's report. He paused and asked, where did the magistrate go after releasing them? An Ying did not expect his master to ask this question. He was stunned for a moment before he replied, I think he went to Prince Murong's mansion. Is Prince Murong also the one who led the guards to put on a show? Beligaju stopped drinking tea. An Ying answered, yes. Upon hearing this, Beligaju's eyes darkened. An Ying could not guess what his master was thinking. He just continued to kneel and listen to his master's orders. After a while, Bailey Jiaju picked up his pen and wrote a letter. Even though it was a letter, it was only a few words, send it to the military camp. The cold tone of the voice made Shadow realize that this letter was not an ordinary one. Yes, sir, he replied solemnly. Then he jumped out of the wooden window. But he did not know that the person standing outside was the one who wanted to kill the third prince. Bang, 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 the sound of knocking came from outside the door. Beligaju was the only one left in the room. He put down the book in his hand and walked over. His face was still cold, without any warmth. The door was opened. There was a person he did not know standing outside. But judging by his clothes, he was indeed a student of the academy. The student laughed, but the curve of his mouth was a bit abnormal. Why are you still in the room? Someone died at the superior compound again. The dean told everyone to gather at the tea house. Hurry up and come with me. As the student spoke, he reached out to grab Bailey Jiaju. However, Bailey Jiaju evaded his hand without a trace. Obviously, he did not expect there to be such an uninteresting person. The student paused. Probably because all the students had gone to the tea house, the courtyard was eerily quiet. Only the heavy footsteps and rapid heartbeats could be heard. Occasionally, there was the sound of the wind blowing. Both of them did not speak. Obviously, Bailey Jiaju had no intention of following the other party. Gradually, the student lost his patience. He slowly raised his head and smiled strangely. You're so troublesome. Since you don't want to follow me, I can only solve it here. Solve what? Solve you. Beligaju looked at the rain outside. It was raining non-stop. Compared to the student in front of him, he cared more about whether he would be wet. Even though he was a demon, he was still frustrated by his attitude. The student tilted his head and took off the hat on his head, revealing a pale face. His black hair fluttered in the absence of wind, giving him a sinister look. Ha! It's been a long time since I've met such an insensible human. But it doesn't matter. Soon, you'll taste the consequences of being insensible. Is that so? Beligaju's voice was very indifferent, with a special kind of absent-mindedness. It was as if he did not care about the student at all. The student maintained the sinister smile on his face, but he was a little surprised. This human seemed to be different from the one he had met before. When ordinary people saw him like this, they would kneel on the ground and beg him to spare their lives. Forget it, this stupid human must have not realized how terrifying he was. The student clenched his teeth, and black smoke spread from his body to the surroundings. His face had no nose and no mouth, only an empty mouth. However, Bailey Jiaju only held his forehead and smiled. His eyes were ice cold. Before you eat people, have you ever thought that there's something called bait in this world? You dare to touch bait? Ha! The moment Beligaju looked up, the student took a big step back. He looked at the man in front of him in disbelief. You, who are you? Impossible, he was definitely not that person. If he was that person, how could he not see through him? And this burial mound. He must have broken through it a long time ago. But why were his eyes? Beligaju did not speak. He looked down at the student from above. His white teeth were slightly exposed, and he was as handsome as a god. He slowly walked towards the student. His white clothes wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold murderous aura. When the student saw him, he wanted to run away immediately. However, the man pulled him out of his body with his bare hands. This time, the demon-transforming beast was completely flustered. It tried to find a way to get into the fog. At the very least, it had to tell its master that the man might be back. However, before it could even take a step forward, a blazing heat spread throughout its body. It was a pain that came from the depths of its blood, spreading to its entire body. When Hellion Vivian walked up, she saw such a scene. The man's hands were stained with blood. His black curly hair fluttered to his waist. He was like a god in the dark. He was so handsome that one could not take their eyes off him. There was a deep sense of mockery in his eyes. That wild aura and the seductive corners of his mouth made even the magical beasts hidden deep in the academy tremble and be captivated by him. Under the light, his face was almost perfect. It was naturally cold. However, Beligaju did not expect Hellion Vivien to walk up at this moment. He put his hands behind his back as if he was trying to hide something. Ha, how ridiculous. He, who had always regarded the world as nothing, was actually concerned about how others looked at him. That was right. He did not want his prey to see his bloodthirsty look. Are you okay? A clear voice came into his ears. Because she was running too fast, she seemed to be worried. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivien. The hostility in his eyes faded away. He wondered how much she had seen just now. However, that person started to touch it. She touched it left and right. Then, she raised her head. Her face was full of seriousness. Do you have time to learn from each other? To be honest, when she saw His Highness's posture just now, she really wanted to fight with him. She wanted to see where his limit was. How did he crush a magical beast with his bare hands? Bailey Jia Ju smirked. Ordinary people would have thought of him as a monster if they saw his killing skills. She was the only one who wanted to fight with him from time to time. Sure. Beligaju's voice was calm. What do you want to bet? Hellion Vivien, anything. As long as His Highness was willing to fight with her. Beligaju looked at her. As if he thought of something, evil appeared in his eyes. Then the loser will warm the bed. Chapter 399. Warm the bed. Hellion Vivien instinctively felt that something was not right. After all, she had been tricked by someone's words. For example, the obligation of husband and wife. Come to think of it, the definition of warming the bed was, if she won, he would warm the bed for her. If she lost, she would warm the bed for him. Was there a difference between winning and losing? Hellion Vivien was speechless. Therefore, when His Highness agreed to fight with her, it was a trap for her to fall into. Hellion Vivien raised her eyebrows slightly. She crossed her arms and glanced at the man beside her. She saw that on that noble and flawless face, there was still a wicked and wanton arc. When the sun shone on it, it was like the shards of a diamond. Every part of it was just the right amount of handsomeness. When his thin lips pressed closer, he directly pressed them behind her ear. What? Are you going back on your words? Hellion Vivien trembled. She did not say anything. Yuan Ming's voice rang out, the formation has been broken. The person who set up the formation should still be at Green Dragon Lake. Don't flirt with your man for now. Hurry up and go to Green Dragon Lake to see who is controlling the formation. Hellion Vivien did not bother to correct Yuan Ming. She jumped out of the wooden window and flew toward Green Dragon Lake. Beligaju retracted his finger. His eyes fell on the evil beast on the ground. He stepped on it casually with his left foot, puff. Beside Green Dragon Lake, the little one with the gourd on his back was in pain. Black blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Master, the demon-transforming beast seems to have been killed. That person's spiritual power was too strong. Before I could react, I know. The man reached out and patted the little one's head. There was a comforting warmth in his voice. The dead man burial ground is no more. There is still the slaughtering of the courtyard. Emperor Murong's army should be here soon. However, we can't stay here any longer. Let's go now. As he said that, the man opened the paper umbrella in his palm and walked into the thick mist. Helene Vivian, who had rushed over, only had time to see a blurry figure. Without any hesitation, Helene Vivian struck with her left hand. A swoosh was heard. Lu Guang's silver knife shot towards the man's back. Helene Vivian clearly heard the sound of clothes being torn. Then, it sounded like a child exclaiming, "Master!" However, when she got there, other than the bloodstains on the ground, there was nothing else. He really escaped quickly. Moreover, this person was very smart. Originally, she had stabbed him because she wanted to use the bloodstains to determine his location. However, other than the first pool of blood, Helene Vivian did not find a second pool of blood. It was obvious that the other party had thought of this and reacted accordingly at the first moment. Such a meticulous mind was truly difficult to deal with. With your current cultivation, you won't be able to deal with that person. Yuan Ming's figure floated up, his eyes looking at the gradually dissipating mist on the lake. His formation was just broken, his body is a bit weak. Under normal circumstances, if you were to fight face to face, woman, your chances of winning are very low. Helene Vivian picked up the silver knife that had fallen on the ground and put it back behind her waist. Her movements were handsome. I really want to see what kind of person he is. You'd better not see him. Yuan Ming rubbed his aching temples and curved his thin lips. However, to be able to hurt such a person, woman, you're already very abnormal. I think he thought of dodging, but he didn't expect your knife to be so fast. Helene Vivian smiled and did not continue speaking. At this moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from outside. The sound was too loud, it was hard to ignore it. Helene Vivian reached out and grabbed a classmate who ran out, asking in a low voice, "What's going on?" That student shook his head, looking confused. "It's the prefectural magistrate. The prefectural magistrate is here with his soldiers." Prefectural magistrate. Before Helene Vivian could think about it, she saw the prefectural magistrate walking in with a group of soldiers behind him. There were too many soldiers in that group, and they were guarding every exit of the academy. Helene Vivian faintly felt that there was some kind of danger. In her previous life, she dealt with such matters. Therefore, she was very sensitive to the slightest sign of trouble. Helene Wei paused her steps and glanced at the outside of the courtyard. The bailiffs outside had been replaced by armored soldiers. If they were only here to investigate a murder case, it would not be so grand that even the soldiers from the army would be transferred here. Thinking of this, Helene Vivian's heart suddenly thumped. Investigating a murder case didn't require such a large formation, but if they wanted to deal with a prince, almost in the next second, Helene Vivian turned around and returned to the inferior compound. Without a doubt, these people's target was Beligaju. At the same time, all the students were driven to the inferior compound, and the prefectural magistrate kept saying that it was for protection. However, the students were not stupid. They looked at each other and sensed that something was amiss. "Your Highness." The situation was urgent, so Aning didn't care about the people around him. He directly knelt in front of Beligaju and spoke faster than usual. "Prince Murong is not conducting a drill. He secretly mobilized the city guards and planned to cooperate with the prefectural magistrate to suppress the academy. I followed your Highness' order and went to the barracks nearest to the academy, but, at this point, Aning raised his eyes and looked at Beligaju, who was still calm and collected. He clenched his fingers and seemed to be angry. They refused to send the soldiers. Helene Wei's figure paused. In her impression, the 18 shadows had never been in such a sorry state before. Although he was wearing black clothes, it was obvious that he was injured. Moreover, it wasn't just in one place. Because of the blood sticking to his clothes, it had already formed a shadow. From the moment he entered, he had been clutching his abdomen. It seemed that he had a knife wound. The situation was not as simple as Aning reported. Not only did the barracks at the foot of the mountain not send the soldiers, they also wanted to take the opportunity to kill Aning. But in this world, there was no one who didn't know. The 18 Shadows were almost the representative of the royal family in the current dynasty. They were not like the other attendants. In the Huang dynasty, only the most powerful martial arts master could command them. Even the current emperor, as long as he didn't practice to the most powerful level, could not make them willingly submit to him. But now, someone dared to openly attack the 18 Shadows. Beligaju had his reasons for not interfering in the Academy's case. The relationship was complicated, and one wrong move could lead to eternal damnation. If she had not asked him to help save Hei's, the current situation would not have happened. Hellion Vivian lowered her thin lips and slowly clenched her fingers. Yun Biluo glanced at her, and her eyes gradually lit up. Chapter 400. She walked to a deserted corner. Yun Biluo blocked Hellion Vivian's way. Hellion Vivian was not in the mood to play along with her. She looked up with a cold gaze and uttered coldly, "Get lost." Yun Biluo took a deep breath and her expression changed. She said, "I don't care how you treat me, but I really didn't expect that you would let His Highness take the risk for young Master He." She paused. "You asked His Highness to intervene, right? Otherwise, young Master He wouldn't have been released so quickly." Wei Wei's back view paused, the hand hidden in her long sleeves tightened, but that pair of eyes carried a different kind of clarity and rationality. Yun Biluo's voice softened. "His Highness has told me about what happened between you and His Highness. Both of you have made an agreement. It's understandable that His Highness helped you, but don't you think you've gone too far this time? Are you done?" Hellion Vivian looked back and smiled bloodthirstily. "Get lost if you're done." Yun Biluo looked up with a sorrowful face. "You and I both know what Shadow's report means. Emperor Murong wants to kill His Highness and replace him. His Highness and I will be together soon. I don't want him to be in danger because of an agreement. If possible, I hope you can leave. Only when you're gone, His Highness will be relieved of the burden on his shoulders." After that, she walked into the crowd, not caring about Hellion Vivian's reaction. Because she had guessed it. A person like Hellion Vivian would definitely not be able to withstand the pressure and would choose to leave. Bang. Another student who wanted to leave was invited back to the inferior compound by the soldiers. They did not understand what happened to their martial chi. It was not until they saw the prefectural magistrate coming back from the well that they realized that they had been poisoned with a certain amount of cultivation dissipation powder. The amount of cultivation dissipation powder was very small and was not fatal, but it reminded them not to use their martial arts. Outside the courtyard, the prefectural magistrate had already begun to deploy his troops. Even though he was sitting in his room, he could hear the sound of horses galloping at the foot of the mountain. It was obvious how fast they were approaching. Although the Shadows were injured, they were all expressionless. They were spread out in every corner of the inn, using the vantage point to control the Academy's every move. Even if they were injured now, if someone underestimated them, they would still lose more than they gained. This was the power of the 18 Shadows. However, there was still no news from the barracks. The letters that were sent out seemed to be dead. They did have people in the capital, but they were quite a distance away. Even if they had already received the news, they would not be able to make it in time. The magistrate didn't make a move because he knew that anyone could leave except for the third prince. Even if he had the best martial chi, it was still the same. A prince who abandoned his subjects and fled in the face of war, how could he be the ruler of a country in the future? If he ran away, he would definitely be spat to death, and his face would be tarnished. They had planned everything before besieging the mountain. Every move was to drive the third prince into a corner. Even if he didn't die, he would have nowhere to go in the future. Yun Biluo looked at all this and was so worried that she gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly. The situation was more complicated than she thought. The army was pressing in, and they couldn't get any reinforcements. There was only one end for them, death. She didn't expect that things would turn out like this just because she asked the young master to send someone to arrest Hi's. No. She had to persuade His Highness to leave the hospital and leave the mountain. With the sound of running outside, every student looked at Beligaju like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Although they all had martial chi, they had never been in a war before. Among them, there was no lack of ladies from noble families who usually lived a very good life. They usually needed someone to support them when they walked, so they had never been frightened like this. At this moment, they were almost crying after a tiring day. Your Highness, let's get out of here quickly. We can't go on like this. Once the gate is broken, it will be difficult to leave. Yes, Your Highness, let's get out of here now. How daring can that magistrate be? Yun Biluo saw that everyone had spoken, so she also lowered her voice. Your Highness, I know you're worried about those students who can't leave, but at this point, we can only get out of here first. At most, we'll compensate them later. You are the prince of the great Huang dynasty. If something were to happen to you, what would happen to those people who have helped you for so many years? How many spies have you planted for so many years? Aren't you waiting for the day you can sit on that throne? The future prosperity and decline of the War Dragon Empire will all depend on you. Are you willing to die in this Azure Dragon Mountain? What Big Sister Yun said is correct. We only need to take the people from the superior compound and the fine compound away. The people from the remaining two compounds should have been willing to sacrifice their lives for His Highness. Among those people, most of them will also go into battle in the future. Now that His Highness has a use for them, what's wrong with them sacrificing a bit? The young ladies from the superior compound spoke these words confidently. Besides, they could definitely escape. Things were not as complicated as what Hellion Vivian thought. It was just an insignificant official who had an idea that he shouldn't have. There were many officials in the Green Dragon Mountain area. So what if the military camp didn't send troops? When they reached the capital, there would be someone to protect His Highness. No matter how bold they were, they wouldn't dare to hurt the third prince openly. It was undeniable that the ladies from the aristocratic families were so self-righteous. Even the military camp refused to send troops. How could they reach the capital safely? Facing this kind of stupid people, Bailey Jia Ju curved his thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. Shadow, since these people want to leave so badly, then send them all away. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and looked at those overly pampered ladies from the aristocratic families. He couldn't help but shake his head in his heart. These people were hopeless. Didn't they know that during a siege battle, the first batch of people to escape would only die more miserably? His Highness's means were still so ruthless. I'm not leaving. Yun Biluo raised her beautiful teary eyes and looked at Beligaju with a gentle face. No matter what happens this time, I'll stay by your Highness's side and take care of your Highness. Yun Biluo didn't continue because the look in Beligaju's eyes made her extremely uncomfortable. That kind of aloof indifference, even without any emotion, made people feel that there was a hint of mockery in it. At this moment, a shadow guard came in from outside and said in a low voice, Your Highness, the Princess Consort seems to be missing. Chapter 401. The air in the courtyard was stagnant for a moment. Yun Biluo's drooping little face revealed an arc that no one noticed. Beligaju's voice was as cold as a thin layer of ice. What do you mean by, seems to have disappeared? I haven't seen the princess consort since just now. Speaking of this, the shadow guard paused and continued, the second young master of the Hay family also disappeared with the princess consort. Beligaju listened and clenched his fingers one by one. His hands that were hidden under his sleeves became clearer and clearer. He clenched his fists so hard that his fingernails turned white. A burst of exclamation came from the crowd. Even the second young master of the Hay family is not here. In my opinion, I'm afraid that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family was scared when she saw the scene outside. She didn't forget to bring along her old lover before she escaped. Yun Biluo listened to the surrounding conversations and subconsciously looked towards Beligaju's direction, as if she wanted to comfort him. She called out hesitantly, "Your Highness, it's understandable that Wei Wei did this. After all, anyone who saw such a scene would want to escape." Yun Biluo raised her head. She thought she would see a furious face, but to her surprise, not only was there no emotion on Bailey Jiaju's face, he did not even lift his eyelids. All he did was play with the black jade ring on his finger. No one knew what he was thinking. Even Shadow couldn't understand his master's meaning. He always felt that Miss Yun was speaking for the princess consort at first glance. However, it was true that the princess consort had left, but the cause of this matter had not been investigated clearly. It was not good to jump to conclusions so early. However, why did the princess consort leave? After a long while, Bailey Jiaju finally opened his mouth, but the words he said had nothing to do with Hellion Wei Wei. His voice was indifferent, but that pair of long and narrow eyes overflowed with a murderous aura. Send these people who want to leave out first. Also, who told you that she escaped? Everyone froze. They didn't understand why his voice was so cold. They didn't understand why they could still feel the piercing coldness when they were about to be sent out. Shadow, who knew everything, lowered his head and replied with a yes. At the beginning, His Highness was probably just saying those words out of anger. But now, His Highness was truly furious. Perhaps the reason for all this was because these people had just spoken ill of the princess consort. Your Highness. Seeing that Beligaju did not listen to everyone's advice, Yun Biluo's eyes reddened. She quickly followed him into the room. Miss Wei Wei's departure is hard for you, but this is the truth. Aning has just reported to me. When you were young, you also said that you hated betrayal the most. After so many years, I have always regretted it. If I could have been with you at that time, you wouldn't have been so cold to me, right? Who gave you this illusion? Beligaju sneered mockingly. He casually picked up a teacup and played with it in his hand. Perhaps it was because of his temperament, it always made people feel that he was not holding a teacup, but a chess piece in a decisive battle. Especially when he was standing by the window, looking at everything outside with his dark eyes, like a superior waiting for an opportunity to strike, about to start a beautiful battle. Yun Biluo's face turned pale from his words, but she still refused to give up. I know it's difficult to get your highness forgiveness, but anyone who sees a child with golden eyes will be scared. You were too violent at that time, more terrifying than a pack of wolves. I didn't want to leave you behind, I just wanted to call for help. At that time, His Highness who was covered in blood was too scary. A child who was only 10 years old actually stood in the bloodstains and laughed, as if he enjoyed the slaughter. How could there be such a person in this world? Only a monster would do that. However, later on, that child became more and more honorable. Only then did she realize that she seemed to have made a mistake. But didn't she take the initiative to apologize? Why didn't His Highness give her a chance? Yun Biluo twisted the handkerchief in her hand and bit hard on her thin lips. Then what about Hellion Vivian? She was more afraid of you at that time. hiding whenever she saw you. Has your highness forgotten all these? Upon hearing this, Beligaju's fingers that were playing with the porcelain cup paused. A loud bang was heard. The courtyard door seemed to have been knocked open by something, making a loud noise. Countless infantrymen rushed in and stood at the entrance. Beligaju did not even look at Yunbiluo. His eyes met with the magistrate who barged in. He was still as cold as a celestial, and the smile in his eyes deepened. Under that smile, there was a hint of profoundness. It seems that I haven't been angry for a long time. What a pity, I'm not in a good mood today. As he spoke, he slowly twisted his left hand, and a fierce martial chi suddenly rose in the air. The soldiers who barged in did not have time to see the man's movement clearly. In just a moment, all the intruders exploded at the same time, and hot blood splattered everywhere. Ah! Miserable cries filled the entire inferior compound. Dozens of soldiers exploded at the same time, and blood and flesh splattered all over the magistrate in the distance. The magistrate's hands and feet trembled, and even his breathing was difficult. His face was pale, and his teeth were chattering. He almost knelt on the spot. However, he realized that he couldn't move at all. He could only watch as the demon-like man walked towards him step by step. Why didn't you say anything when you came to see me, Your Highness? The man curled his thin lips and whispered with a smile. However, such a smile was like a deadly curse to the magistrate. The face in front of him was too handsome. Compared to that, what was more unforgettable was the oppressive aura that he exuded. This caused his handsomeness to become somewhat cold, like a top-notch treasured sword that was about to be unsheathed. At this moment, the deafening sound of horse hooves came from outside the door. The sound was very loud, and it must have been thousands of horses to create such a loud sound. Zhang Gu and Iron Horse had arrived. This was a true massacre of an army at the gates. Emperor Murong was not as stupid as the magistrate, who stood so close to Beligaju. Instead, he rode a war horse and stood a few meters away. He faced Beligaju from a distance. He did not want to be recognized, so his face was covered. Rows of archers stood in front of him to guard against Beligaju's surprise attack. However, Bailey Jiaju only looked at him and smiled coldly, just like a high and mighty demon god who was looking down at the ant-like existence of humans. His chilly aura made the surrounding soldiers somewhat timid. Murong Wang, you really have a lot of guts. Aren't you afraid that I will exterminate your entire family? Chapter 402. Emperor Murong was enraged by his arrogance. He no longer hid his identity and tore off the mask on his face. He looked into Beligaju's eyes with a cold smile. Your Highness wants to kill 9 generations of your family, but you need to be alive to escape. Based on the current situation, do you think you can escape? Even the shadows you send out were turned back. Now, the entire Green Dragon army is under my control. If you're really smart, you should obediently allow yourself to be captured. Otherwise, the people around you will suffer together with you. After all, the arrows have no eyes. Beligaju did not speak. The shadows, on the other hand, did not waver. Their handsome faces were calm and their eyes were burning. Beligaju did not let them protect him. Instead, he took a step forward. He walked slowly and elegantly, so much so that the people around him forgot to draw the bows in their hands. Do you really think that I will allow you to attack without making any preparations? At this moment, the cold and indifferent voice was like the cry of a superior weapon. Emperor Murong disagreed. Your Highness is talking about preparation. Are you going to the other barracks to ask for help? It's useless. No one will send their troops. The young master had personally ordered that all the barracks under the 4 great families were not to leave the barracks by even half a meter. This time, Bailey Jia Ju must die without a doubt. Who told you that no one will send their troops? Suddenly, a cold and languid voice came from the thin mist in the west. Who's there? Emperor Murong, who was interrupted, was a little impatient. He waved his hand and all the archers raised their hands and aimed at the black fog. The voice only disappeared for a second before it was heard again. It's me. A white fog rose and a slender figure gradually appeared. Her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's. She stepped in the billowing smoke. Her black robe fluttered in the wind, revealing a unique handgun at her waist. Her top-notch streamlined figure shone with low-key luxury. That figure stood in the white fog for a long time. The corners of his mouth were slightly curved, and he had an indescribable evil charm. However, no one could see his appearance clearly. He could only vaguely see her slender fingers lazily caressing Gunshot's body. She looked at Beligaju, who was not far away, with a faint smile. Her temperament was one, and it was shocking. Behind her, a row of people could be faintly seen. That row of people were all dressed in black armor. They did not have blades in their hands. Instead, they stood tall and slender. Their speed was as fast as lightning. Often, people would overlook their appearance. Looking from afar, they looked like a huge black mountain. The soldiers began to panic, their hands trembling as they held onto their bows. It's the flag. It turned out that the black color that was waving above the soldiers was a huge flag. There were only 3 words written on the flag: Hidden Army. Hidden Army. That's. The magistrate could no longer speak. His legs gave way and he took a heavy step back. Anyone who had been in the army would know that the Hidden Army was the Hidden Army. Emperor Murong's eyes opened wider and wider as Hellion Vivian approached. It was as if he had seen an emissary from hell. Murong Changfeng, who was standing beside Emperor Murong, seemed to have stopped breathing at that moment. There was amazement and shock. But more than that, there was an unknown fear. Just when everyone thought that the Hidden Army had disappeared with the change of Hellion family's owner, it actually appeared without any warning. And the person leading it, Murong Changfeng, suddenly raised his head and looked at the slender figure's face. It's her. It's actually her. Murong Changfeng's eyes shook violently. All these years, the reason why he allowed the people around him to bully Hellion Vivian was because she was a fool. In the future, she would not be able to help him in any way. That was why he listened to his father's orders and thought of ways to divorce her. But now, she actually became the leader of the Hidden Army. A huge sense of regret welled up in his heart. He could not hide it no matter how hard he tried. It turned out that he had long regretted it. However, those regrets had never been as strong as now. Yun Biluo, who was standing at the corner, looked at the scene in front of her. Her small face turned pale. She thought that Hellion Vivian left because she listened to her. Why? Why did she appear here with the Hidden Army? How did she get such a powerful army? Yun Biluo bit her thin lips. She was just saying that Hellion Vivian was a coward and ran away. But now, she felt like she had been slapped in the face. Emperor Murong was not as flustered as the others. So what if the other party was the Hidden Army? No matter how powerful they were, they could not win against them in terms of numbers. When Emperor Murong thought of his backup troops, he sneered at Hellion Weiwei. This time, you've really opened my eyes, you piece of trash. You're too kind. No one was a match for Hellion Vivian when it came to throwing and tugging. She looked at Emperor Murong and smiled handsomely. This is only the beginning. I'll beat you until you're crying for your parents. Then, you'll fully understand what a godly weapon is. Emperor Murong's face darkened. He was so angry that his teeth chattered. It's still not certain who will win. You want to fight against an army of tens of thousands with just 100 people. You're so stupid that it's pathetic. Pathetic. Hellion Wei Wei stroked the gun in her hand, curled her lips into a smile, and said leisurely, "You're the one who's pitifully stupid. Have you ever thought about why not a single soldier from the other military camps has entered the city since you brought your soldiers into the city?" If Hellion Vivian did not ask, Emperor Murong would not have realized the problem. But now that she asked, Emperor Murong's face changed completely. It was terrifyingly pale. He pulled a soldier beside him and growled, "Where are the soldiers from the other military camps?" I don't know. I don't know." The soldier was trembling in fear. Emperor Murong pushed him away forcefully and scolded, "Useless." At this moment, a soldier ran over in a panic. The hat on his head was slightly crooked. He was panting as he spoke, Your Highness, there are enemy troops outside the city. We're not sure which military camp they are from. Our reinforcements have been surrounded by them and are blocked outside the city. What are you panicking for?" Murong Wang slapped him across the face. This soldier's words had lowered their morale. He waved his sleeves and suppressed the panic in his heart. He sneered and said, "Everyone, listen up. Even if the enemy is the hidden army, they only have 100 people. We have tens of thousands of soldiers. It's impossible for them to defeat us. Don't worry. Raise the arrows in your hands. Each of you only needs to shoot one arrow to defeat them. Is that so?" Hellion Vivian heard his words and raised her beautiful eyebrows. She looked at Little Bald Head who had been following behind her and smiled wickedly. "Little Seven, go get third sister-in-law's gun. Since His Highness wants to bully us with numbers, we can only change our weapons." Chapter 403. The little seventh prince nodded his head in a dignified manner. Then, he bent down and picked up a black object. He lifted it up and handed it to Hellion Wei Wei. The length of the object was almost longer than the little seventh prince. When it stood upright, it could reach the little one's nose. It seemed to be made of metal and looked extremely heavy. Before anyone realized what it was, Hellion Wei Wei lifted it up with a force. With a smile on her face, she commanded, "Hidden Army, listen up. All of you, switch to the 18-round heavy impact machine guns." Then, the crowd heard a series of clicking sounds. All the soldiers in black raised their arms. Their left hand was a support and their right hand was holding up a black pipe. "Is this the equipment you were talking about?" Emperor Murong laughed. Obviously, he did not like the thing that looked like a bamboo pipe. Even the 18 black shadows were looking at each other. They couldn't understand why Wang Fei would take out such a child's toy. Only Beligaju's beautiful eyes darkened when he saw the black pipe. He looked at Hellion Vivian with his dark eyes and did not show any emotion. At this moment, Hellion Vivian picked up the sniper rifle and placed it on her shoulder. She adjusted the aiming device. Then, with an evil smile, she pressed the button. Boom! There was a flash of red light and the sturdy roof was lifted. 5 to 6 archers fell from their hiding place. The tiles rolled on the bluestone path and made an unbelievable deafening sound. Amidst the billowing smoke, the magistrate's expression was already sluggish. His mouth was wide open as he stared blankly at the woman who was walking towards them with a black spear on her shoulder. His legs, which were already weak to begin with, had now lost all feeling in them. What is that? The magistrate was out of control. Even his voice was close to shouting, "What is that fucking bomb?" Emperor Murong's face was filled with confusion and a chill from the bottom of his heart. He wanted to ask too. How could she blow up the house with just a lift of her hand? Was it like an explosive? But how did she put the explosive into the black pipe? How did she ignite it in an instant? At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Murong Wang's mind. But the only thing that was fixed in place was that they were finished. Even if they had tens of thousands of soldiers, it was impossible to win. How could he possibly win? Why had no one ever told him? Was there such a weapon on the divine land? What the hell was that thing? However, this was not the end. At the same time, countless well-trained hidden soldiers fired at the same time. Every shot hit the foot of the soldiers, and countless sparks flew. Amidst the thick smoke, Hellion Vivian walked casually and handsomely. She casually passed one of the special sniper cannons to Little Seven. The Little Seventh Prince stretched out his small hands and caught it firmly. He held it in his arms and followed behind Hellion Vivian. His small face was calm and there was not a trace of expression. He would attack whoever he was unhappy with. He was very mighty and domineering. The archers who were lying in ambush at the prefectural magistrate's side were all scared out of their wits. Not only did Hellion Vivian's attack make them not dare to act rashly, even the weapons in the hands of the hidden soldiers made them feel weak in the knees. They could no longer raise the bows in their hands. Not only was the opponent faster than them, even the accuracy of their shots was much higher than theirs. There was still the terrifying smoke around their feet. No matter how much Murong Wang roared, the archers maintained the same posture. Murong Wang, who had planned carefully for so long and thought that victory was in his grasp, was completely flustered at this moment. He looked at the figure that was getting closer and closer to him. He could not help but drag a soldier to stand in front of him. But in the next second, the soldier was shot dead. Fresh blood gradually dripped down his face. The corner of the woman's mouth was slightly curved. Her white dress was fluttering wildly in the hot wind. The night Rakshas's beautiful wings were flapping wildly. Her beautiful face reflected a seductive red, with undisguised arrogance and confidence. No matter how beautiful the color was, it was just a foil in front of her. Thump. The prefectural magistrate could not hold it in any longer. He knelt on the ground, crying and shouting, "Princess, please spare my life, please spare my life." It was over, it was completely over. What would the group of archers do now that the commander has surrendered? One by one, they put down the bows in their hands and knelt 10 miles away. It was a magnificent scene. Hellion Vivian was still holding the sniper cannon in her hand. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the prefectural magistrate. She said lazily, "It's useless for you to beg me. You should beg His Highness." The prefectural magistrate was stunned and looked in the direction of Baligaju. That man, even though he was in the midst of the billowing smoke, was not stained by the dust. The elegant cloak draped over his shoulders made him look like an emperor who held the power of life and death in his hands. The more he was in a situation like this, the colder and more dangerous he looked. It was as if he was born to be a god who killed the world, giving people an absolute sense of oppression. The prefectural magistrate trembled in fear. In front of Hellion Vivian, he still dared to beg for mercy. But in front of this man, he kept kowtowing. The sound was so loud that it was painful to hear. Baligaju did not even look at him. His eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's small face. Hellion Vivian did not understand why he was looking at her like this. She frowned. Come here. No matter how much the world was tormented, the royal family's tone was always commanding, leisurely, and indifferent. Helene Vivian looked at the surrounding students and the archers who had just surrendered. She could not ignore Beligaju's feelings. She carried her gun and walked over. Her posture was quite handsome. But before she could finish her handsomeness, Beligaju lifted her chin. Helene Vivian's long and narrow eyes widened in an instant. She looked like a silly fox who had been bitten by a tiger. Wait a minute. Was this guy thinking of kissing her here? It turned out that Helene Vivian was thinking too much. Because the royal family saw that her face was dirty, they threw her a handkerchief and asked her to wipe herself. Helene Vivian was speechless. Holding a gun with one hand and wiping her face with the other, she still did such a stupid thing. A certain someone who was obsessed with cleanliness was always so crazy. Helene Vivian pursed her lips helplessly as she wiped her face. Beligaju looked at her and reached out to grab her hand. Holding it in his palm, his thin lips curled up. His deep eyes looked more charming than ever. His sexy voice rose slightly. What were you looking forward to just now? No, Chapter 404. The man suddenly leaned forward and kissed Helene Vivian before she could finish her sentence. The refreshing scent that came from his mouth made Helene Vivian feel a lack of oxygen in her brain for the first time in her life. While her head was numb, she could only hear the obvious gasps around her and the dry and steady heartbeat of the other party. The whole sky seemed to be spinning. Beligaju parted slightly with the help of her strength. He grabbed her wrist with one hand and did not loosen his grip on her other hand. He went around her back and pressed the back of Helene Vivian's head forward. He deepened the kiss as if no one was around. Everyone was dumbfounded. They never thought that the noble and pure royal family would kiss anyone. Yun Biluo's face was even paler. She clenched her fists so tightly that they almost pierced into her palms. Her pair of eyes that were always gentle and harmless were filled with jealousy. A slightly cool sensation exploded on the tip of her tongue. Helene Weiwei awkwardly wanted to retreat, but he gently swept the coating on her tongue and slowly sucked on it. Helene Weiwei's whole body trembled like a cooked prawn. She curled up in his embrace, her fingers trembling, yet she couldn't move. The sound of friction between the clothes seemed to be much louder when they rubbed against each other. However, Beligaju did not restrain himself. Instead, he kissed her harder, as if he wanted to suck all the air in her mouth. Helene Vivian's legs gradually lost their strength. Her body was almost like a puddle of water. There was nowhere to run because of his invasiveness. She didn't know when she dropped the gun in her hand. By the time she reacted, her fingers were tugging at Bailey Jiaju's clothes. The corners of her eyes were red as she threw herself on his shoulder, gasping for air. Beligaju reached out and pulled her into his arms. His fingers trailed along her back. His whole body was filled with the pleasant smell of elegant sandalwood. If you run around again, I'll break your claws. It was a threat, but there was no coldness in it. Instead, his deep and sexy voice brought out patient gentleness. It made Helene Vivian feel like her ears were about to get pregnant. The little seventh prince looked at this scene and thought that when he had a wife in the future, he would also kiss her on the battlefield. Don't ask him why, he was just that capricious. The hidden army that Helene Vivian had brought along looked at each other in shock. However, King Murong wanted to use this opportunity to get rid of Beligaju. He grabbed the soldier's bow and arrow. Just as he was about to pull the bowstring, he was knocked off his horse by the seventh prince's cannonball. A rumbling sound rang out. No matter how powerful Murong Wang was, he could not withstand such powerful firepower. His entire body was sent flying and slammed heavily onto the ground. You really don't have good eyesight. The little seventh prince lifted the cannon in his hand and walked over coolly. He lifted his foot and stepped on Murong Wang's body. Puff! King Murong felt a sharp pain in his chest and blood spurted out of his mouth. Seeing this, the soldiers behind him put down their weapons and knelt on the ground. They shouted, "Your Highness, please spare our lives." Hellion Vivian looked at this scene with satisfaction. She was the one who had caused trouble for Beligaju. Naturally, she should be the one to settle it. However, she seemed to be too arrogant. Hellion Wei Wei curved her thin lips, her pretty eyebrows and eyes curved. So what if she was arrogant? She wanted to use this method to tell the world. The Hellion clan was going to rise again. She, Hellion Vivian, was going to take back everything that belonged to her. Amidst the billowing smoke, Beligaju hugged her and sat on the peak of the mountain. He looked down at the thousands of soldiers below him. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were noble. His black hair and white robes were tangled together. It was as if a god had descended. Hellion Vivian leaned on him lazily. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes were slightly raised. She looked like a hedonistic playboy. Looking at the two of them, it was easy to think of a sentence. This is the land of thousands of miles. If you lose, I will rise again with you. If you win, I will accompany you to rule the world. Hearing the loud chants of long live, the curtain of a sophisticated siege came to an end. King Murong and Crown Prince Murong were imprisoned. Beligaju had his reasons for not killing them. Hellion Vivian knew that he wanted to wait until everything was over before bringing them to the imperial court. If they were to be dealt with now, only the Murong family would suffer. However, if they were to be brought to the imperial court, all the soldiers who did not send their troops would be pulled out one by one and executed. The imperial court would welcome an even greater change of personnel. Faintly, the people could only smell a message. The Empress's power had been weakened too quickly. It was so fast that the people did not even have time to react. When they looked up, the positions of the important officials had been replaced by the people of the royal family. The four great families were beginning to panic. Master. When the matter was almost settled, the fire Qilin revealed its original form and knelt on the ground. It asked respectfully, should the army lying in ambush around the school remain and await orders, or should we retreat with the Princess Consort's hidden army? Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly tidied up his sleeves and uttered a few simple words, go back. Yes. After receiving the order, the fire Qilin disappeared in a flash, just like how it had come. Under the dusk, Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's excessively handsome face and raised her eyebrows. You have an ambush at Green Dragon Mountain? Yes. Beligaju did not intend to hide it from her. Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. How many? 30,000. His tone was still indifferent. Hellion Vivian realized that even if she did not appear with the hidden army, this man would not be in any danger. This was because he already had a plan in mind, including Emperor Murong's rebellion and the tens of thousands of soldiers lying in ambush outside. If Hellion Vivian and the rest did not come with the hidden army's flag, they would have been targeted by this man's ambush. You brought soldiers to Green Dragon Mountain? Hellion Wei Wei asked probingly. A prince leading troops out of the capital and so on, if word got out, it wouldn't be too good. He wasn't afraid that someone would accuse him of treason. Beligaju's answer was very casual, just a few servants. Hellion Vivian was speechless. That was an army of 30,000, not 3,000. She had never seen a master who could treat 30,000 soldiers as servants. However, while Bailey Jiaju was answering her question, he was still able to order Shadow, "Go and tell everyone that I don't want to hear any rumors about the hidden army appearing in the White Academy in the future." Chapter 405. The hidden army looked at each other. What did he mean by rumor? They had clearly shown up. They did not expect the young master to agree with the third prince. Of course, Hellion Vivian would agree. Now was not the time to let others know that she had already obtained the hidden army. She had not prepared all the weapons yet. If she showed off too much, it would be easy for others to notice. "You, come here," Beligaju spoke again. His tone was a little indifferent, making it hard to read his emotions. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and followed him into the room. Just as she turned around, he pressed her against the door frame. "Tell me, who allowed you to leave?" "I went to get help, not leave," Hellion Vivian said and smiled. "Otherwise, how could I save the damsel in distress?" Beligaju pressed against her. "Save the damsel in distress? You? Wasn't I handsome just now?" Hellion Vivian yawned lazily and looked at Beligaju. She wanted to walk out of the shadow that he had created. "Frankly speaking, I stood up for you this time. Are you very grateful to me?" Beligaju nodded and pulled her back. He slowly lowered his body and stared at Hellion Vivian. His soft ink-black eyes could easily make people sink into a deep pool. Hellion Vivian was a little uncomfortable under his gaze. Just as she was about to open her mouth, the heat that covered her lips instantly took away her words. The hand that fell on the side of her face was now holding her chin. Her lips were licked, her teeth were invaded, and he was teasing her mouth. He was obviously a cold person, but he could actually arouse such heat. From his mouth to his body, and the arms behind her back, it caused a strange sensation in her heart. "Beligaju, you can't." She tried to move her lips away, but the stirring of her tongue turned her words into a murmur until they melted between the two of them. The moist heat and the scorching breath reduced her resistance. She could not resist Beligaju's kiss at all. "Can't." Beligaju moved away slightly, as if to refute her words. He didn't allow her to breathe and once again devoured her lips. His fingers slipped into her clothes, and his deep voice was hoarse. "Your body doesn't say so." She didn't know if it was because of the slightly cold temperature of his fingers, or because of his words. Hellion Wei only felt that both of her legs were weak. She weakly endured his kiss in his embrace, and her consciousness also started to uncontrollably drift to the distance. "Ah, Ju, I heard." The sudden noise woke up the two people who were intoxicated. Hellion Vivian came out from Beligaju's arms and glanced at Tusu Feng. She rubbed her thin lips with the back of her hand and her breath was still a little unstable. "I'll go out first. You guys talk." Beligaju didn't have the slightest shame of being caught red-handed. He reached out and tidied his collar, then looked at Tusu Feng. "Next time you come in, knock on the door first." Tusu Feng smiled gently. "I thought that a kid like you, who would feel dirty even if someone touched you, would never be enlightened. I didn't expect that, huh? How is it? Is it exciting to do this in the academy?" "It feels good." Beligaju sat on the chaise lounge with his legs slightly crossed. His tone was cold. "But a 10,000-year bachelor like you can't understand this feeling." Tusu Feng felt like he was shot in the knee. The corner of his mouth twitched. This icy kid, his mouth is still as poisonous as ever. "Murong family, what do you plan to do?" Tusu Feng sat down and prepared to talk business. Beligaju curved his thin lips, and the smile in his eyes faded. Of course I'll uproot them, so that those disobedient old men can live in peace. The rest of the people were indeed in peace. Because they didn't expect Beligaju to survive. They chose not to send troops because even they thought that Emperor Murong would succeed this time. Who would have thought? Oh, who would have thought? They made the wrong bet. The people on the fifth prince's side were almost completely annihilated. The emperor's uncle rebelled, and the empress was also unlucky. She was completely removed from her position as empress and was imprisoned in the dungeon, never to see the light of day again. Helian Guangyao saw this and only regret was left in his heart. He frowned at the secret guard who came to report. Who sent the troops to the third prince and let him break out of the siege? The secret guard shook his head. I'm not sure, but it seems that the royal family was already on guard. That means that Murong has been too careless this time. Helian Guangyao didn't ask more when he heard that there was an ambush. Instead, he looked up and said, "The clan meeting is about to begin. From today onwards, keep an eye on the madam. Don't let her notice anything. I still need the Su family." Yes. The secret guard lowered his eyes. He knew that the madam couldn't know what the old master had been doing recently. Otherwise, it would definitely be a mess. Helian Guangyao stood up and was about to leave. Also, send some gifts to the heads of each family. When the clan meeting starts, let them remember to choose me. Yes, sir. The secret guard finished and looked up again. But there's a stubborn old man that I can't handle. He seems to be bent on choosing the eldest Mississippi, Helian Guangyao sneered. I know who you're talking about. Don't worry about him. He's just a second-class handicap who followed the old master on the battlefield. Now that his leg is broken, he can't even stand properly. Every time the clan meeting starts, there will be 11 people making decisions. He alone can't change the situation. Moreover, I've already found someone to contact the hidden army. The hidden army? The secret guard looked up and his eyes suddenly brightened. Old master, you've contacted the hidden army. Helian Guangyao's face was filled with pride. I'm in contact. To ensure that nothing goes wrong, I want that little bastard to completely give up on fighting for power with me. You're wise, old master. The secret guard praised loudly. Helian Guangyao smiled and waved his sleeves confidently. It was night. A cool breeze blew and the stars twinkled. Helian Vivian looked at the paper in her hand and smiled wickedly. She said to the person who delivered the letter, "Tell Qi Yan that since he wants the hidden army so badly, give him one." Yes. The person saw the smile on his young master's face and knew that she was up to no good. He did not say much and flew out of the White Academy after receiving the news. After settling the official business, Helian Vivian planned to see how the things that she asked Hei's to prepare for her were going. Just as she opened the door, she met with a pair of indifferent and narrow eyes. "Where are you going?" Taking a walk, Helian Vivian felt that it was not a good decision to look for Hei's today, so she silently retracted her leg. Beligaju smiled, his eyes turned dark brown. "Is that so?" "Yes." Helian Wei smiled, her expression was very sincere. Beligaju leaned lazily against the door frame and glanced at the package in her hand. "This is the first time I know that you need to carry this thing for a walk." Chapter 406. I'll feel more secure if there's something accompanying me. Helian Wei didn't know that she was so good at lying. Beligaju looked at Helian Vivian and slowly took a step forward. Suddenly, his thin lips curled up. So Madame has been hinting at me to accompany you. Helene Vivian was speechless. That's great. I have time today. Tell me, where do you want to go? Beligaju bent down and slid his slender fingers across the collar on her neck. It seemed that if she didn't tell him the truth, he would change to another thing and lock her up. Helene Vivian, who didn't plan to go for a walk, could only choose a place in the White Academy that was the furthest away from Hei's. The back of the mountain. The back of the mountain. Beligaju frowned. There are too many mosquitoes. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. You shouldn't be afraid of mosquitoes if you bring Fire Qilin out. Besides, would mosquitoes, these fragile creatures, dare to get close to you? They wouldn't be ready to suck blood and would be frozen into pieces by you, okay? The two of us are going for a walk. Why do we need to bring other things? Beligaju looked at her and said matter-of-factly. Helene Vivian was speechless. What should she do? She actually didn't know what to say. Then let's go to the academy. There are fewer people. Helene Vivian knew that he didn't like crowded places. This time, His Highness didn't have any objections. The air in ancient times was very good, especially at night. The scenery was good and the wind was very comfortable. The restlessness in Helene Vivian's body seemed to have been soothed a lot. The chirping of insects could be heard all around, and fireflies could be seen dancing in the grass. Helene Wei's entire body was relaxed, her eyes were filled with laziness. Beligaju looked at her and pointed at the green tiles of the academy. Do you want to go up? Okay. Helene Vivian nodded. She had been here for so long, but she had never been on the roof of an ancient building. Beligaju stretched out his hand and stopped her. With a light tap of his foot, he was standing on the roof with Helene Vivian in his arms. Be careful, your feet will slip. So professional. Helene Vivian chuckled and paced back and forth. Then, she sat on the edge of the room and leaned back. Looking at the night sky, he lazily patted the spot beside him. This angle is not bad. Lie down and take a look. Beligaju originally wanted to say that it was dirty, but when he saw the smile on her small face, he swallowed back the words he wanted to say. His lean figure was like a painting when he casually laid down. Helene Vivian looked at him and sighed in her heart. This kind of man was really born to harm women. As if he noticed her gaze, Beligaju rested his head on his arm and smiled arrogantly that Helene Vivian had never seen before. So comfortable. Helene Vivian put her hands behind her head and looked at the night sky. There were no such bright stars in the modern world. I haven't seen the Big Dipper in a long time. How did you find such a good place? Beligaju listened to her voice and closed his eyes. His long black eyelashes cast a shadow and his voice carried a bit of indifference. When I was young, I often went up on the roof. You? Go up on the roof. This didn't seem to be in line with His Highness' style. Shouldn't someone like him be sitting in a luxurious palace and giving orders? Beligaju glanced at Helene Vivian's face and knew what she was thinking. This Highness is also a human. I also need to rest. Rest on the roof. What kind of hobby was this? Beligaju glanced at her from the corner of his eyes and said, I like to stand at a higher place. Helene Vivian. You are indeed more suited to be the second generation of the Emperor. You are born to be the Emperor. Then when you are resting, what do you usually think about? Beligaju turned the black jade ring on his little finger and the corners of his mouth carried a frivolous smile. Who am I going to kill next? Helene Vivian. Are you really resting? What? Scared? Beligaju turned his handsome face and his thin lips slightly curved. His pitch-black eyes were so deep that no one could see any trace of emotion. Hellion Vivian stretched and was somewhat indifferent. As long as you don't kill me, it's fine. The main thing is, aren't you tired? You think about killing people all day, even when you are resting. Tired? Bailey Jiaju chuckled softly as he casually hooked a strand of Hellion Wei's hair with his fingers. His fair fingers intertwined with her ink-black hair. The sudden contrast made the white look whiter and the black look darker as they intertwined together. Accompanied by a low and gentle voice, they outlined the scene of a spring night, warm but hazy and elusive. How could this be? What an interesting game. However, he would get bored after playing too much. His prey was more interesting. Therefore, he must not let her know what he was like when he was at his most brutal. You treat everything as a game. Hellion Vivian shook her head and yawned again. The two of them chatted, and Hellion Vivian unknowingly fell asleep on the roof. When she woke up, it was dawn. The night was cold and the two of them couldn't help but hug each other tightly for warmth. Perhaps it was because of the change of environment, she didn't know when she returned to the room. She was probably carried back by Beligaju. Hellion Vivian took a while before her brain woke up. Then, she realized that she was staring at the man. Because of the difference in height, Hellion Vivian turned her head and her gaze fell on his chest. Beligaju wasn't wearing any clothes, and his figure was too good to be true. His skin was delicate and soft, and his smooth lines were very clear. He was like a fine piece of jade, but at the same time, he had all the sexiness that belonged to a man. Hellion Vivian, who was about to explode at night, saw this scene and her throat tightened. She told herself in her heart to stop looking, stop looking. However, her gaze unconsciously moved down. Her long black hair covered the bed like a waterfall, gently drifting past her waist, revealing her sexy and perfect Apollo's belt, as well as her long, straight legs that could be vaguely seen even though she was covered by the quilt. Hellion Vivian resisted the urge to sit on him. She took a deep breath and planned to get up first. However, he reached out and pressed her back onto the couch. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. His long black hair fell down like clear streams of water, falling on her neck. It felt cool and gentle, refreshing her heart. His pale lips were as beautiful as the petals of the morning, and the deep and light colors in his eyes were so beautiful that it made her heart palpitate. Hellion Vivian's breathing became a little hurried. Looking at this face from afar, she couldn't take it anymore. At such a close distance, she felt that her body couldn't take it anymore. Her heart was beating a little faster, and the blood flowing in her veins was warm. At this moment, Beligaju was like a demon prince who lived in the deep sea and bewitched humans. Moreover, why was he suddenly so close to her? In the next moment, Hellion Vivian understood. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.